3 minutes after 10 is the time. Can you hear me at the back? Is everything all right? Is that okay? Is it all working? Hang on. Everything good? Right, well done, everybody. One job, lads. One job. Just let the dog see the rabbit. Let the people hear my voice. I don't know what happened there, but I will take full responsibility for it and apologise profusely. I am aware. Please stop sending me messages. I am well aware that you could hear very little of my talk up there towards the end of next programme. So my apologies for that, my full responsibility. And oddly, it was not a very nice talk up. It was not a very easy talk up. I need to preface what I'm about to say with two observations. The first is what we call a trigger warning. I know some people pretend not to understand what that means or to understand why it's important, but I'm about to share with you some details of scenes in Gaza that are, I mean, for many people, close to unbearable. And I put myself among that number, to be honest with you. And the second thing I need to do is to remind you that Israel continues to keep foreign journalists out of Gaza. So we rely upon much less detailed footage and reportage than we would otherwise. The question of why Israel keeps foreign journalists out of Gaza is probably answered by the events that I'm about to relay to you. And the fact that not having foreign journalists there leaves at least some room for carefully cultivated doubt and denial. So the Al-Aqsa hospital has already been reduced to such a condition that many people are sheltering in tents outside the hospital, and those tents have now been attacked. Some of the footage appears to show people burning alive while attached to IV drips. This is 2024. This is the 21st century. This is an ally of the United Kingdom. There's also been a school attacked. And the Israeli policy that is now under discussion or that is now being contemplated as something that may actually be underway is the brainchild of a former general and effectively involves treating everybody as though they are, well, terrorists. And I'm going to quickly tell you what the least intelligent analysis in this entire hideous field involves. And it is the suggestion that because Israel is possessed of an almighty war machine, if it really wanted to embark upon ethnic cleansing or, God forbid, genocide, then it would have done so already. This displays an ignorance not only of military history, but also of basic moral decline, so profound that you wonder how anybody even offering up such a thought could tie their own shoelaces. No atrocity in history happened in 24 hours. The build up to atrocity is slow and hideous because, to use an utterly inadequate analogy, it's the mother of all exercises in boiling a frog. So you don't go in on day one and start burning people alive in tents while they're attached to IV drips. You claim on day one that you're trying to rescue hostages, or that you're only going to attack terrorists, or that you're taking enormous care to spare civilians. It's only by day 370 odd that you can undertake this sort of thing with some confidence that America, and to a lesser but still significant extent, the United Kingdom will stay silent. The second stupidest contribution to this conversation is the idea that if somehow the remaining hostages were released, Israel would stop attacking Lebanon, where there aren't any hostages, and Gaza, because Benjamin Netanyahu has made it absolutely clear that is simply not the case. And anybody following these matters closely will tell you that the families of the remaining hostages are among the least supportive Israelis. Many of the families of the remaining hostages are among the least supportive Israelis of Benjamin Netanyahu's administration. But make no mistake, it is an administration that still enjoys great support in Israel, even as people object and protest to what is going on. The democratic nature of the country means effectively that they wouldn't be able to continue in power without a mandate from the electorate, and that mandate remains. And that's, where we are now. I don't want it to sound like I'm trivializing anything, but I think this is a moment where everybody can actually agree with each other. The hospital courtyard where people were sleeping was preceded by an attack upon a school sheltering families. That was in Nusrat. The school today was scheduled to become a polio vaccination site. Philippe Lazzarini, who is the Commissioner General of UNRWA, describes another night of horror. Tents up in flames due to an airstrike on the courtyard of Al-Aqsa Hospital where people sought shelter. A school hit with 20 people reported killed. That's where the polio vaccination campaign was due to be conducted today. That has now been cancelled at that school, at that site. He describes Gaza as a never-ending hell. All of this must not become the new norm. Humanity must prevail. Is it too late? Has it already become the new norm? In Lebanon, as you know, United Nations troops have come under attack. There are reports of Israeli tanks moving into United Nations compounds, and as that contributor to the news just explained, that is akin to a sort of conscious, if you like, attacks on civilians, and it is something that is being undertaken with, and here's the word that I think describes most of what we are describing today, it is being undertaken with apparent impunity. Some countries, of course, continue to at least make the right noises, most notably Spain and latterly Ireland as well, who have troops in the space affected. But of course, America, crucially, and the United Kingdom, relevantly, continue to essentially, I can't say turn a blind eye, but engage in complicity while also condemning. And without proper condemnation, of course, Netanyahu will carry on. This is a statement from UNIFIL, which is the United Nations interim force in Lebanon. Last night, a peacekeeper. Let's think about that word for a minute. A peacekeeper. UNIFIL's headquarters in Nakara was hit by gunfire due to ongoing military activity nearby. He underwent surgery at our Nakora hospital to remove the bullet and is currently stable. We do not yet know the origin of the fire. Also last night, buildings in our UN position in Ramya sustained significant damage due to explosions from nearby shelling. We remind all actors of their obligations to ensure the safety and security of UN personnel and premises, including avoiding combat activities near UNIFIL positions. I think we've reached the point now where, and of course the condemnation of various United Nations organizations and United Nations institutions by members of the Israeli administration and members of the Israeli government is well underway. So I don't know how much you have listened to our coverage of this over the last year and a bit, but the point at which the really terrible stuff moved into focus was the point at which people who rang me would not answer a question about how many deaths would be too many deaths. Now, I appreciate it was a very simplistic question, but you had people in the Israeli cabinet who were prepared essentially to suggest that there was no such thing as an innocent Arab. They would certainly claim that there was no such thing as an innocent life in Gaza. The ludicrous and frankly insulting insistence that great measures are taken to spare civilians should never really have been allowed to see the light of day. But it didn't just see the light of day. It got rolled up so many flagpoles in the United Kingdom and the United States that it became actually a sort of accepted analysis of a situation despite being completely at odds with all available statistical evidence. But that, to me, and I apologise for reducing it down to the conversations that we've had, but that's all I've done. That's all I've done, is have conversations. And God, it feels inadequate, doesn't it, when I'm reporting to you that I have seen footage this morning of people burning alive while apparently still attached to IV facilities, IV equipment in tents to which they have been consigned as a consequence of the hospital in the courtyard of which these tents have been erected being either completely unfit for purpose due to previous bombings or utterly inundated. So the idea that inability to answer the question of how much looked like too much, how much would constitute, if you like, disproportionality. How far did entitlement reach? And I had this terrifying fear, and I told you at the time, that people didn't have the guts to say out loud what some members of the Israeli cabinet were saying, that they didn't really think there was a limit on how many people could die or be killed by the Israeli Defence Force. You could hear it sometimes in the voice. You could hear the fury about even being asked the question. You'd simply say, well, how many is too many? It's 40,000 now, or it's 20,000 now. Will 30,000 be too many? And this, to my mind, utterly spurious notion that you're going to eradicate Hamas or get the hostages released by killing tens of thousands of civilians. And when perhaps the bloodlust was no longer being satisfied by what was going on in Gaza, they turned their attention to Lebanon and start killing civilians there. And up to and including, it would appear, United Nations peacekeepers, at least attacking. So is this a moment, and this is what I mean about the fear of sounding as if I'm trivializing it, is this a moment where finally everyone can actually agree that Benjamin Netanyahu's administration is embarked upon a course of utterly detached impunity? They care not a jot what the rest of the world may think. They don't care about the United Nations. They don't care about their allies in the United States or indeed in the United Kingdom. They don't care about the civilian death toll. They don't care about the burning children. They don't care about anything really except continuing this, I don't know what you would call it now, carnage? Dozens of Israeli soldiers were hurt after Hezbollah said it struck a military base with a swarm of drones. So, I mean, again, looking at the early coverage of the events of the last 24 hours, it looks at the moment like Hezbollah is making more effort to confine its attacks to military sites than Israel is. Just in the context of that attack, obviously the missiles continue to fly into northern Israel. So a squadron of attack drones crossed the border into northern Israel. And I will get now probably 5,000 text messages accusing me of imbalance for pointing out that nobody died. Nobody has been filmed burning alive. No children are now being mourned by displaced parents. So is this the moment at which everybody can agree that Benjamin Netanyahu's government is completely without, what's the word I want? Completely without, what's the word I want? Conscience? Pause? Unstoppable? There is literally nothing in place in this context now that could be meaningfully described as a deterrent to continuing the killing. Because countries have called for it. Individuals have called for it. Allies have called for it. People in Israel have called for it. The point now is that every death, you can no longer pretend that it's a question of proportionality or that it's a question of ebb and flow. We have reached the point that everybody feared. Everybody who has insisted for the last year and a bit that they feel no more or less horror at the thought of a burning Israeli than they do at the thought of a burning Palestinian. There is no hierarchy of human value for so many people who are not personally invested in the region, the politics or the war. And the greatest fear of people like them, people like me, the greatest fear has always been that extremist attitude inserted into the very heart of government by Benjamin Netanyahu as an exercise entirely in self-preservation is now just government policy. We will carry on we can't even tell you why we're killing anymore. Oh, we're trying to eradicate Hezbollah, or we're trying to eradicate Hamas, or we're trying to get the hostages released. How does burning people alive while they're hooked up to IV facilities, and if that in any way turns out not to be true, the reason why it's being so widely reported today is because Israel won't let journalists into the region from overseas. This is just the point, isn't it? I mean, it's almost as if the debate is over. Israel is going to do whatever it wants. Israel is going to display absolutely zero compassion or compunction in its continuing carnage, in its continuing killing of civilians in Lebanon, peacekeeping, it would appear, forces and civilians in Gaza. Israel has gone completely rogue. And the weird thing is that I don't think there's any debate to have here, because you can't, with a straight face, claim that Israel is demonstrating compassion or Israel is demonstrating restraint or Israel is still enjoying proportionality. This is now gone, and because it's a boiled frog, because it's a slow increase. I mean, it's only a year and a bit since I was sitting here trying to explain to you why nobody could expect Israel not to respond in an incredibly violent fashion, why Hamas had handed Israel the right to exact appalling revenge upon territories that sheltered Hamas. And I believed it then, and I still believe it now. But my God, we passed the point of proportionality. We passed the point of entitlement. We passed the point of retaliation. God knows how long ago. Be a different point for many people. For me, probably, the point at which my alarms started ringing loudest was the point at which they started bombing the places to which they told the people to move to stay safe. An experience that Lebanese civilians are now sharing in, following the experiences in Gaza. 90 minutes after 10 is the time. That's it, isn't it? This is the point at which no one can pretend anymore that there is any break upon Netanyahu's murderous ambitions. There is no compassion to be exercised. There is no compunction to be applied. This is it. I don't know how it ends. I don't know the point in asking how it ends. I just know that the Israeli army is going to carry on butchering civilians on a scale that is almost beyond belief, because they have established without any doubt whatsoever that if there are any people in the world capable of stopping them, it would be Joe Biden, and he is not going to do it. So that's where we are, isn't it? 0345 6060 973. It's 22 minutes after 10. In addition, yesterday, IDF soldiers stopped a critical UNIFIL logistical movement near Mace A Jebel, denying it passage. The critical movement could not be completed. I'm reading about plans to stop aid getting into areas where aid is desperately needed, which is, under most analyses, an apparent war crime. For the fourth time in as many days, said the United Nations interim force in Lebanon yesterday. For the fourth time in as many days, we remind the IDF and all actors of their obligations to ensure the safety and security of UN personnel and property, and to respect the inviolability of UN premises at all times. So United Nations not capable of exerting influence or of staying the hand of Benjamin Netanyahu. Joe Biden not capable of exerting influence or staying the hand of Benjamin Netanyahu, which means nobody is, which means literally nobody is, which means all bets are off, which means that impunity and entitlement are winning. Dina is in Cheltenham. Dina, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say that America has proven that they value Netanyahu's opinion and his desire to, for want of a better term, Israel to defend itself when it's not actually defending itself. There's a growing amount of Palestinians, Lebanese, British, Americans who see Netanyahu for what he is. He has no plan for peace at all with Palestinians. Look at the number of innocent civilians that have been killed in Gaza and now in Lebanon, women and children. And look at all the charitable organisations and the UN peacekeeping force.
I haven't even mentioned all the aid workers that have been killed at this point.
And
of course,
the aid workers as well. At what point are we going to allow Netanyahu use this line that Israel has the right to defend themselves?
I don't know how you stop him from doing it. There'll be people in my inbox, there's probably people waiting to talk to me who will claim that Israel has the right to continue burning children alive because it is defending itself from from Hamas and from Hezbollah. And I suppose intellectually you need to tell them why that's not a valid contribution to the conversation.
I don't think our right-wing media help either.
Well, I'm asking you, how do you tell someone who is going to say that this is an act of self-defense? I mean, I might find it a ridiculous contention, but if we give them benefit of the doubt to somebody making it in good faith, how do you explain? I'm leaving aside the very real possibility of war crimes being committed, which makes a nonsense of the idea that these are sort of inevitable and justifiable acts of, quotes, war, end quotes. But how do you prove to someone insisting this is self-defense that it isn't self-defense? Because I'm not sure you can.
Well, I think you can start by allowing journalists in the area, because Israel, for the last year, have used the line that they wish to protect journalists and that they won't allow them in the area.
Well, they'll take some in. They'll take patsies in who will write propaganda for Israel. They can go in, they can accompany the IDF. But the best foreign correspondents in the world, or the English-speaking world, whether it is Christine Amanpour at CNN or Matt Fry of Channel 4 and LBC fame, whether it's Lise Doucette or whether it's, I don't think Kate Adie's in the game anymore, but they live to report on situations like this because, of course, the truth is a sanitizing light, and they are being denied access. Again, I mean, it doesn't address the point of somebody claiming that this is somehow self-defense. And I don't know that you can. I think it is the sort of rhetorical acrobatics that Netanyahu now relies on, including the rhetorical acrobatics of people who in their hearts know better. But for historical reasons, for philosophical reasons, for simple logistical reasons, they've gone so far now down the road of support, they can never go back. And I feel for them. I really do, because I can't believe anybody is comfortable with what is happening now. And yet Benjamin Netanyahu has pushed them to a position where they have to pretend to be. David is in Swindon. David, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say Israel is unstoppable at the moment. They're like a rabid dog. And to my view, the only way to stop them would be to have severe sanctions. Now, we all know the United Nations is useless. They've got so many sanctions against them, International Criminal Court. And the Israeli spokesman, I think it's David Mensa,
right.
Whenever he's interviewed, he says, oh, yeah, proportionality, and we've got the lowest kill rate. You know, the ratio of civilian to military is the lowest in any any war that's taken place. They will not listen.
But they can't. You can't take both of these calls in because you can't say that unless you let foreign journalists in to clarify exactly. and report upon the reality.
Yeah.
So
That's
you know,
right.
I'm entirely comfortable joining these particular dots together. But another reason why you don't let foreign journalists in is so that you can continue claiming that you're somehow exercising discretion or that you are not committing war crimes. Otherwise, you let the journalists in yesterday.
That's right. Like you were saying earlier, there are no universities, no hospitals, no schools, desalination. It's just unbelievable that the United Nations and America supports them. Now, I'm going to sound harsh now.
Okay.
I really think that Iran will hit Israel, and they'll hit them hard.
Well, God forbid. What would that achieve? And also, I hope you're in the same category as me, but I don't want any Israeli civilians to suffer any more than I want Lebanese or Palestinian or Gazan civilians to suffer. So I don't know what that would achieve.
Okay, all right then. What about sanctions then? Let's stop oil import. Let's stop oil exports to Israel. Let's stop buying Israeli products. Perhaps Iran, okay, they won't bomb it. What about if Iran have already did it a few years ago? Seal off the Straits of Hormuz, so the world's supply of oil.
What did Thatcher do after the last invasion of Lebanon? I'm pretty sure she went much further than Joe Biden or Keir Starmer have gone. But of course, and I can hear the desperation in your voice, the search for something that might stay the hand of Benjamin Netanyahu. But I think you began by essentially acknowledging that nothing can and nothing will. So you sort of scrabble around. And remember, Donald Trump could be back in the White House early next year, in which case the idea of any American pause or any American-inspired call for compassion, call for peace, introduction of compunction, that goes out the window. in a moment. David, thank you. It's 10:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The question is hideously straightforward, hideously simple, and strangely unifying, because whether you are on board with Benjamin Netanyahu's abominable behaviour or whether you are passionately opposed to it or whether you're ambivalent, I don't know that anyone can now disagree with the conclusion that he's going to do whatever the hell he wants, regardless of international peacekeeping forces, regardless of international law and regardless of international condemnation. So at least we can all agree about that, right? Here's Jenny Barsby with your headlines. It is 10:34. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And, I mean, it is almost impossible to know which angle to approach the latest events from regarding the Middle East. You know, or at least you have heard in the news bulletin there, that the attacks on areas in Lebanon will continue, even if United Nations peacekeepers remain in the area, and yet the Secretary-General of the United Nations has made it clear that he believes attacks on peacekeepers may constitute a war crime. UNIFIL personnel and its premises must never be targeted. Attacks against peacekeepers are in breach of international law, including international humanitarian law. So cue the music. Cue the claims that no, they're not. It's not in breach of international law at all. It's not in breach of international humanitarian law at all. Billy Baggins, I know more about international law than the General Secretary General of the United Nations does. So we can all agree, I think, that nobody thinks Benjamin Netanyahu is going to be prevented from pursuing inconceivable civilian deaths in Lebanon and Gaza by anybody. In Israel, outside Israel, in the White House, in the United Nations, in the 40 countries that have signed the letter insisting that he doesn't do the thing that you've just heard in our news bulletin he's already said he's determined to do. So at least we can all agree on that, can't we? 0345 6060 973. Naz is in Enfield. Naz, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I've phoned you several times. Thank you for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
How long is the world going to watch on, James? We've been through. I studied World War II, and we said never again. How long is the world just going to watch? We know of people, families who've watched their family die on video. Innocent children, women, children. Innocent workers like doctors, their
120 journalists, aid workers, but Israel has a right to defend itself, Naz.
No, Israel has a right to defend itself. So does the United Kingdom. Did the United Kingdom bomb Ireland when the IRA came? Did they?
No, I mean there was no campaign of bombing civilian
and,
areas in the hope of catching some terrorists. They did undertake some pretty hideous policies, both covertly and overtly, but no, of course not. You know the answer to that question.
Yes, I agree. And I totally agree. But I've been saying, I've phoned you so many times. We know of children, women that have been raped by IDF soldiers. Nothing gets through. On the Western media, unfortunately, now that things are slipping through a bit, but it's always Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel.
How do you counter that point, though?
Say, look, all these people.
Where is the limit of defence? What do you say? Yes, I know this, but what do you say to somebody who still clings to the self-defence argument? How do you prove to them that we have gone, or Israel has gone beyond that point?
I think. I'm a part of a Jewish Muslim women's campaign. We try to talk about peace, and what we say is, like, as mothers, seeing babies, seeing videos, it has to stop, James. Not everybody, as you said, not everybody in Israel supports the government. Not everybody, but enough support the government. The settlers are violent towards all the people in the West Bank, and that's only been recently shown. They say Arabs are animals. All Arabs are animals. They teach their children that all Arabs are animals. They're not human. And Benjamin Netanyahu just wants the greater Israel, Judea, Samaria.
I've seen all. I mean, listen. This isn't. I've asked you. I've tried. I know everyone's very emotional today, but I have tried to ask you questions, and you have gone off on slight tangents now. So, I mean, that because it's an impossible question to answer, I presume for you is how do you prove to somebody that this has gone way beyond self-defense? And I think we're all familiar with rhetoric in the Middle East that portrays Jewish people in a hideous fashion as well. We've seen evidence of that. So, however, the point that you make about sexual abuse and rape, the United Nations has. I think it was in February of this year. The United Nations did make that point as well. Although some people won't like you making it. That's the problem, isn't it? Is that you can tell from my voice, I'm as uncomfortable with rhetorical fire in one direction as I am with rhetorical fire in the other direction. And yet some people, many people, and you may even be one of them, many people struggle now to see it through two lenses, to see it as a conflict with, if you like, two sides. 10:40 is the time. Sam's in Birmingham. Sam, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James. It's a very kind of atrocious what's happening in the Middle East. It's just an interesting, I wanted to highlight, have you ever seen a documentary by the name of Tantora? It's the village in
I'm just going to steer you to the conversation that everybody else has been having since 10 o'clock this morning. So have we reached a point where everybody accepts Benjamin Netanyahu is just going to carry on doing whatever he wants, regardless of whether you are broadly supportive of the continuing carnage or repulsed by it?
Of course. And
we have reached that point.
Sorry, what was the question again? Sorry.
Well, I've been asking it since 10 o'clock this morning.
Yeah. So in terms of, no, there's not going to be a limit. I think it's going to continue. It's only going to get worse. It's only going to escalate. And if you look at the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict from the 48, and the reason I referenced Tantora documentary is if you watch the documentary, there's a testimony there where a child is thrown into a burning oven, a Palestinian Arab child is thrown into a burning oven. So it's no surprise that we watched the horrific scenes last night, and it's just a global it's essentially it's what we've seen on the news the last hours, the desensitization, but we've only seen it for the last year because of what happened on October 7th. What we don't talk about the preceding events of the Deir Yassin massacre, Sharab Shatila massacre. What we don't talk about is the border wall opine from the ICJ. We don't talk about the July 2024 ICJ, which declared Israel as de facto occupier of Gaza, of the West Bank, and apartheid state.
Did it use the phrase apartheid state?
No, so
you shouldn't say that it does. I mean, certainly not if you're coming on to tell us that we're not covering things and then you misrepresent them. So, I mean, I've mentioned almost all of the things that you've just referred to in the course of conversations that we've had. But obviously, the conversations that we've had since October the 7th have been determined by the events of October the 7th and the response to it. So always a broader context. But I think what's different today, and the phone-in that everybody else has been having, is about whether or not we have reached a point that is unprecedented, whether or not even in the context of all the history that you mention, mostly accurately, whether or not there is now a sense of some standard having been breached, some milestone having been passed. And it is the idea, I would suggest, that there are forces on the planet capable of winding Benjamin Netanyahu in. And I don't know when it happened to me. I don't know if it has happened to you. But I no longer believe that to be true.
So, and unfortunately, this is not just Netanyahu. This has been the policy of successive governments before Netanyahu. Hence, why I referenced the Tantora documentary.
No, but again, I don't know. I don't want to be at loggerheads with you, but I need to remind you we're talking about the unprecedented nature of what we are seeing now. And it may have been the unwritten policy of an Israeli government, but I would throw back to the last time Israel invaded southern Lebanon and the response of Margaret Thatcher's the response of Margaret Thatcher's government is completely at odds with what we're seeing today. I have abandoned the hope/belief that the quotes international community end quotes is capable of staying Israel's hand, and I think you are as well. I don't fully understand why you're trying to overcomplicate the question that everyone else is addressing. You are.
No. I'm just trying to state that UN resolutions, the General Assembly in 1978 said, for example, the right to self-determination, struggle against occupier, and the 2004 border wall conflict, and the most recent one, and the Article 51 on the Chart.
Yeah, so the sense that one day that day might come to dawn, or you go back before the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, whatever it would be. I'm trying today, obviously not entirely successfully, to chart and map what is different about today as opposed to everything that has gone before. So the milestone for me is that idea, perhaps hugely naively, of a Western government, the British government, doing essentially now what Margaret Thatcher did in 1982, and having that idea of a White House being able to say, you have to stop now, and Benjamin Netanyahu having to say, yes, okay, I don't want to, but I will. That's gone. United Nations having agency in the region, having the simple expediency of having United Nations personnel on the ground in Lebanon being enough to ensure that Israel won't attack the bits where United Nations personnel are on the ground. You heard it in the news bulletin. He said that he will. So where is the pause? Where is the caution? Where's the compassion? Where's the compunction? There just isn't any. It's 10:45. It is 10:47. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So, I mean, it's interesting. There's two different stories that I'll share with you, because I don't know how much reaches your ears as a consequence of some very strange coverage in this country of the continuing conflict in the Middle East, and some very biased coverage as well, particularly in the print media. Broadcast media can't get people in to Gaza, which obviously limits them somewhat on what they can and can't get out there. But this is being reported in Jerusalem by the Associated Press, by AP. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is examining a plan to seal off humanitarian aid to northern Gaza in an attempt to starve out Hamas militants, a plan that, if implemented, could trap without food or water hundreds of thousands of Palestinians unwilling or unable to leave their homes. This has become known as the starve or surrender tactic, which is has been given to the Associated Press. The plan has been put together by retired Israeli generals, and it would mean everybody who didn't move, and we'll have to leave for now the question of where on earth you could move to, everybody who didn't move would be considered combatants, which means that troops would be allowed to kill them. I mean, they're not demonstrating much distinction between troops and civilians at the moment, but this would remove any last vestiges of that distinction. So they'd cut off food, water, medicine and fuel to northern Gaza, and conclude that anybody who hadn't obeyed the order to flee was a de facto member of Hamas and would therefore be fair game for being killed. It would cover an indefinite period in an attempt to create a new administration and effectively split the Gaza Strip in two. If you're following Israeli media, it's called the General's Plan, and there are growing beliefs on one side, I suppose, fears on the other, that this is now being considered by Benjamin Netanyahu. One official told AP that parts of the plan are already being implemented, but would not specify which parts. A second official, who is Israeli, said that Netanyahu had read and studied the plan, like many plans that have reached him throughout the war, but didn't say whether any of it had been adopted. So if you were to combine that with the very bellicose language directed at United Nations troops in Lebanon, you'd have a feeling that, and this almost beggars belief, things haven't reached the worst that they're going to reach yet. Things are going to get worse, particularly in the context of either international law, international conventions, or the sanctity, value of civilian life. 10:50 is the time. Number you need if you want to join in, 0345 6060 973. Mazin is in Horsham. Mazin, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Long-time listener, first-time caller. I always sort of press when I close the line. I don't get the courage to say anything.
Thank you.
As a Lebanese, I think we've seen this time and time again. And I think, unfortunately, the lines, sort of what's acceptable, what's the right retaliation, so to speak,
Yes.
keeps getting pushed and pushed further and further towards more civilian
I think
casualties.
now you struggle, or I do, to find people who will claim that what has happened recently is a viable and reasonable response to what happened on October the 7th.
It's something I do hope that this would be the case. From what I see from my friends in the US, it always stops with condemnation of Israel. It's always it's fine to say, oh, we don't want casualties, we don't want civilians to die, but Israel has the right to defend itself. That's the right.
But this is the sort of point to which we keep returning, because those are just what Israel has the right to defend itself. They don't say Israel has the right to burn people alive while they're attached to IV drips. Israel has the right to bomb schools and kill children. Israel has the right to cut off aid to civilian areas. Israel has the right to shoot journalists. Israel has the right to kill aid workers. So that's what they're actually saying when they say Israel has the right to defend itself.
Unfortunately,
and it doesn't. It doesn't have the right to do any of those things.
No,
and a lot of the
not.
people saying Israel has the right to defend itself are too frightened to go there.
Yeah, and I think until Israel says, hold on, I lift my arm, or I lift my hand and I did actually kill civilians, and I did do that, until Israel says that I've committed these atrocities, nothing will actually happen in the US, or until we hit that moment where something really, really big happens, even bigger than what's going on, which is unfathomable.
What do you think? I mean, I know hypotheticals can make a tricky situation worse. But in his own head, if you could somehow read his mind, how does he think it ends?
I honestly don't want to be in his mind, because I think
I know, but
anyway.
but I mean, just realistically, or even someone who is capable of defending the killing of aid workers, the killing of journalists, the killing of tens of thousands of civilians, the moving of tanks into UN peacekeeping force territory, the contemplation of a plan that would render everybody who refused to be evacuated for the umpteenth time somehow being worthy of being killed. How does he think it will end?
That's the thing. I think he keeps testing. It's like a child that basically is looking up to his parent or to whoever's taking care of him, which is like the US, saying, "Can I do this? Let me throw some phosphorus bombs and see what happens. Let me throw some bombs with the uranium attached to it."
Well, I don't know that I haven't seen that. And I think we've got enough uncontested without having to bring contested claims into the conversation. So I haven't seen any of that. But the question of what will he do next, once he's decided that he doesn't have to heed the United Nations, he's rubbished the International Criminal Court, the allies have been completely ignored. I mean, what are the limits? What are the limits on Benjamin Netanyahu's behaviour in Benjamin Netanyahu's mind?
I don't think, Brian, that the allies have been ignored. I think the main ally, which is always matters, is the US. And I think the US is privately saying to Netanyahu something else than what they're saying publicly, which is, we get these reports of them telling them, "Oh, please don't bomb civilians," but deep down they're saying, "You have our full support to go into Lebanon."
I don't agree with you, and I know you're Lebanese, so your opinion is a lot more urgent than mine, and a lot more deeply held. But I think that in private, Biden is, and some reports have come out. I think that Bob Woodward's new book may involve some of this. I may be getting my sources confused. I think privately they're absolutely disgusted by what's going on, but they feel that they're powerless to stop it for whatever reason, whether or not it's because, quotes, abandoning, end quotes, Israel is inconceivable from a political point of view in America. But I don't think that they are implicitly encouraging what we're seeing. I think that they are privately disgusted by it and publicly very, very sort of handcuffed almost. And I'd need to know a little more to know why. Thank you, Mazin. 10:55 is the time. Michael is in Waltham Abbey. Michael, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Yes, pleasure to speak to you. Two things. Nobody, if you'd have been at the demonstration in Hyde Park 2 weeks ago on a Sunday, nobody wants to see innocent people killed. And that's an actual fact. And people said...
Well, that's not true.
Nobody wants to see innocent
No, you
people
don't,
killed.
and I don't, but I'm pretty sure that Smotrich and Ben Gvir are comfortable with the idea, or indeed the Israeli politician who called for a bomb to be dropped upon the Gaza Strip, and there are plenty of people in Hamas and Hezbollah who want to see innocent people killed as well. So the people killing the innocent people are a lot more comfortable with the innocent people being killed than you and me, Michael. I think it's important to bear that in mind. And
Well,
their political sponsors, their political supporters.
Well, I think, to quote the words of John Cleese from 40 Towers, they started it.
Who did?
When Hezbollah attacked on October the 7th.
Go back to 1948, wouldn't you? And the forced removal from ancestral lands of Palestinian people. You could say they started. I mean, this is not... And then you could go back to the Old Testament, and then you could go back before the Old Testament. So I don't think this is helpful.
But okay, say I wanted somebody who was going to hit you. What would you do? You defend yourself. And Israel defended themselves to the right to exist.
Yeah, but if you wanted to hit me, I wouldn't kill your grandchildren.
Well, no,
I wouldn't burn them
that.
alive in order to stop you from hitting me.
I think you're being, very facetious at saying all these things.
I think you are. You've just brought faulty towers into a conversation about something an increasing number of people consider to be a genocide.
Israel are fighting for their right to exist. What's going to happen if Iran suddenly decides to send a bomb to them, fire missiles at them, and there's a mass atrocities in Israel? Israel's got to have the right to defend itself.
Does it have the right to kill aid workers?
No, I don't.
Does it have the right to kill journalists?
They don't kill journalists. And
there's 120 dead already.
But you said there's no journalists in Gaza. But Sky and BBC are there every day.
No foreign-based journalists are allowed into Gaza.
Well, this I don't know about.
You just have to trust me then.
Well, I trust you. I don't trust you on some of your other political opinions, but that's besides the point.
Yeah.
But okay, right.
But you're facetious now.
Okay, maybe I'm a bit there. But seriously, I think...
So what do you disapprove of then? In the context of what Israel has done since October the 7th, what do you consider to be something for which Benjamin Netanyahu should be held to account and or punished?
I think, there should have been more negotiations getting the hostages back.
No, things that he's done that you consider to be beyond moral acceptability, the things that offend you as someone who doesn't want innocent people to be killed. What's he done that offends your sensibilities?
I think he's bombed places where there's been protection. If you've got a human shield, unfortunately, innocent people are going to die, and that's war.
So you're going so every civilian that's being killed was being used as a human shield? Not
everyone, but they are in the area.
Right.
And been more.
And and what sources do you rely on for that information?
Well, the press, the same source that you rely on.
No, you don't, because the only people who claim that are the Israeli Defence Force.
It's not only Israel.
So why can't I send colleagues into Gaza to check? Because if it was true, then there would be absolutely no reason not to let people check, would there?
Israel is the only country in the Middle East with democracy that allows freedom of speech and everything else.
So the tents that were burning last night, containing people apparently still hooked up to IV,
not nice.
What were they shielding?
That was nice. Maybe it was a mistake, and there has been some cases where the IDF have made mistakes.
Michael.
Oh, well, I've listened to myself and I've listened to you. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Bye.
You take care, and God bless. And there it is. That's the sound of carefully nurtured convictions falling apart under the most simple scrutiny, based upon, of course, the evidence of your own eyes and ears, as opposed to the claims of the people who are propagandists for continuing carnage. And that is why the sense now of Benjamin Netanyahu being untrammeled is a word I'm searching for all hour, and I haven't settled upon it. Maybe it doesn't exist, which would be pretty revealing in and of itself, wouldn't it? But the idea that anybody is capable of staying his hand probably left the building some time ago, but this morning I think it's become impossible to argue the opposite, as Michael just showed us. 3 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC even. A palate cleanser now, if you like, or at least something that can allow us to move into much less harrowing territory. I've said it before, and do you know what? I'm going to say it again. There are a few people I envy more than the people who just don't care about anything. I find the conversations like the one we had in the last hour almost unbearable, increasingly so, because I think that we are heading towards things that you probably thought when you were a little bit younger that were consigned to the history books, if we're not there already. But the idea of an out-of-control leader with the support of incredibly extremist allies, riding roughshod over international convention, international institutions, and killing civilians on an extraordinary scale is just horrible. 23 now, we know, were killed in the latest Israeli airstrike on a Gaza school, and the footage that comes out of Gaza in particular looks like something from a dystopian or a science fiction film. 4 minutes out, so we're moving on completely and into utterly ridiculous territory in comparison to what has gone before. But we're human; we need to sometimes. So, Tim Spector, who is the sort of king of nutrition in a sense, the founder of Zoe, the nutrition company, and taken up the mantle, or a sharer of the mantle that the late great Michael Mosley carried as well. He is turning his attention today upon petrol stations and service stations, and he has veered into territory that I absolutely love. And conversationally, I find it so weird. And I think there's another story around today that we won't be covering because it's come from one of those hideous think tank stroke educational charities trying to whip up more anger about people being proud of Britain. No one has said you can't be proud of British history. All that some of us occasionally do is just say, so what exactly are you proud of? And the idea that there's anything in British history to be proud of that you couldn't equally argue if you were Portuguese or Spanish or French, German, or I don't know what else, is obviously ridiculous. So it's about dressing up ignorant nativism as sort of intellectual pursuits. And so no prizes for guessing. But we won't be talking about that today. Tend not to do stories that are inspired by Tufton Street adjacent so-called think tanks, but occasionally duty calls. So we won't be doing that today. But this conversation about why our country is so rubbish. And listen, the more you care about a country, the sadder you would be if things aren't going well. There is an extraordinary piece in Bloomberg this week, and you can read it for free, but you will have to sort of sign up, I think, in order to get your hands on it. But it's an absolutely coruscating, which I use in the correct use of the word, a piece about why the Tories are lost by Chaminda Gianetti, a splendid journalist, and it pulls to pieces what has gone wrong since before 2008, actually. And one among the many brilliant lines, the angry online right, the most stupid people in Britain, may be around to tell us that real conservatism has never been tried, and that the actual Tories between 2010 and 2024 were actually leftists, which I think Liz Truss has claimed. But just this very, very simple point, the tax rises that the Tories introduced were needed to plug the budget gaps that their policy failures had literally created, and that's all without even mentioning Brexit. So when I wonder why things are so rotten here in some fields, it comes from a place of pride in what we could and should be, as opposed to a place of horror at what we have allowed ourselves to become. And nowhere is this truer than in petrol stations and service stations. But what I want to do now, I want to do two or three things. I find it increasingly... Were you listening about a year ago when we stumbled onto a sort of Rosetta Stone of nutrition conversations? And we suddenly realised that the way to have these conversations is to wonder what happens somewhere else, to wonder what happens elsewhere. And it worked with school dinners. I'm haunted by that. I'm haunted by the moment we were having a conversation. We're still dealing with the sort of continuity opposition to Jamie Oliver's wonderful campaign against turkey Twizzlers, wondering why food but the food that we put into our children's mouths in schools is still suboptimal. And someone just dropped into my inbox a menu that they photographed, stuck on their fridge door at home in Limoges, I think it was. Is Limoges the place that's famous for the pottery, Keith? I think it is. So stuck on their fridge door in Limoges, and it was the menu of what their child at primary school age French school will be having at a state school this week. And it read like a menu at a Michelin star restaurant. And I suddenly realised that we've got this entire topic wrong over the last few years because we never extend our gaze beyond our own borders. And I want to do the same thing today. So Tim Spector was at the Cheltenham Literature Festival, talking about steering the diet of Britons away from ultra-processed foods. He pointed out that in France and Spain, that are geographically probably our nearest neighbours apart from Ireland, in France and Spain, ultra-processed food makes up about 10 to 12% of the total. In this country, guess what it is? Go on, guess. What percentage of all the food we have here is ultra-processed? 57%. So in France and Spain, it's between 10 and 12%. In the United Kingdom, it's 57%. And that means stuff that's come off a production line. So some of it doesn't automatically strike you as necessarily being unhealthy. For example, I've often leant towards a Ginster's cheese and onion pasty, thinking it must be much better for me or less bad for me than a sausage roll. And it probably is, but it's still heavily processed. It's full of salt and God knows what else. And it's when you walk into a petrol station or a motorway service that you find yourself, once your eyes have opened to this phenomenon, you find yourself goggling at what has it always been like this? It's the question that I'm going to move you towards, is the why of it, but also the comparison. When the kids were a little bit younger, we tried quite hard on this front, like a lot of parents do. Do you know, I nearly did something then that I'm actually passionately opposed to. I nearly said middle class. I nearly said middle class parents. I nearly said, like a lot of middle class parents, we really tried to steer the kids away from Dairy-Lee Lunchables and give them instead. I imagine breadsticks are processed, are they? Technically, they probably are. They'll have salt and stuff in them. We didn't bake our own breadsticks. But why would I say that was middle class? You see the danger of that little phrase there? Why would I say that was middle class? As if there's some sort of socio-economic monopoly upon nutrition when it comes to our children. As if by dint of being, quotes, better off, end quotes, I'm more likely to care about what's being put into my children's mouths than I would if I wasn't. Am I bringing education into it? Which is an incredibly snobbish thing to do, but probably has some grounding. Actually, the more educated you are, the more likely you are to know the reality of ultra-processed food. But I still think you're unlikely to do anything about it. You're still going to get a pepperami if the kids are crying about how hungry they are in the back of the car on a long journey. But the point I realised at this stage, when mine were younger, is that I walked into a petrol station looking for an apple. Just an apple. The fruit, not the technology. I was looking for an apple in a petrol station that was quite big. You know, the big ones. Well, I mean, some of them now are like mini supermarkets. They generally do have a bit of fruit and veg. But your basic, so you can buy screen wash, you can buy your daily newspaper, you can buy a sack of crisps, potato crisps. You can buy wagon wheels, you can buy Star bars, you can buy all manner of processed snacks. But I couldn't buy an apple. I couldn't buy an apple. And I don't know why. It must have been a conversation that we'd had together on the programme. But I was stunned by it. I was absolutely stunned. I thought, I've never even noticed before. And what I realised in that moment was that I had appalling eating habits. I mean, truly appalling eating habits, especially on long journeys. And that's why Tim Spector is focusing in this speech on, I mean, he covered a lot of other ground as well. He looked at school food and the need to get politicians to stop poisoning our children, saying that school food is terrible, should be mandated to have close to zero ultra-processed food. Hospital food is dreadful. All of the things that are under the control of the government, so schools and hospitals. And in a minute, I'm going to ask people who've got experience of other countries to make a comparison with what we do here. Because I realised that you do it because you haven't got... So what was your snack of choice if you stopped at a service station? And if you don't go into the fast food joint, so you're not having a burger or a fried chicken meal, right? What would you have? You'd have a pasty. You'd have a sausage roll. And you'd probably have a packet of Monster Munch and a tin of Coke, right? Am I right? No one goes in and gets a salad. And don't at me to tell me that you do get a salad, because we're not talking about you. You the habits that... So if you see the kind of on-the-road snacking as a distillation of your bad eating habits, And it becomes a treat. It's part of the treat of the journey as well. So, bag of Monster Munch, pickled onion, please. Even if you're getting a sandwich, that sandwich is ultra-processed. That sandwich has got all sorts of malarkey going on in it. Even if you're getting a healthy sandwich, like a prawn sandwich. So, bag of Monster Munch, cheese and pickle sandwich, or a cheese and onion Ginsters. Other pasties are available. You probably maybe get a little tub of cocktail sausages. No, you would, wouldn't you? Little tub of cocktail sausages, just in case the sandwich didn't fill you up. Tin of pop. And then something nice for pudding. You need something sweet as well for pudding, so you probably get a Star Bar or a Snickers. Think about it. What if you wanted to eat more? You couldn't. You couldn't eat more healthily. So, 2 questions. Why is this country so awful at this? 0345 6060 973. Because if you want to identify something specific to the United Kingdom, you're going to have to explain to me why it hasn't happened in France. We drive on the same journeys that I'm talking about as I munch on my pickled onion Monster Munch, and my little tub of cocktail sausages. On the same journey, I'm going through some of the most beautiful farmland in the world. I might drive through the Cotswolds. I'd drive up to Yorkshire. I'm going through farmland. Farmland to the left of me, farmland to the right of me. So we're familiar with the concept of agriculture. We know what growing our own food looks like, and yet we're sitting in our cars eating ultra-processed gunk all the time. Why is this country so bad? So, look, even if Tim Spector's figures are a bit off, and I've got absolutely no reason to imagine that they are, but the 57% of food in our market being ultra-processed, not processed, ultra-processed, versus 10 to 12% in France and Spain, I want you to tell me why. That's question number 1. 0345 6060 973. Alan says, James, your road trips sound awesome. Alan, you're not helping. You're not helping. So why, in this country, what is it that's happened over the last several decades that has turned us into a country where we are shoving all manner of disgusting but delicious food down our necks, when our cousins in France, our amigos in Spain, our friends in Italy are simply not doing it? That is the question I've got for you. Why? Why in this country are we so bad at this? 0345 6060 973. You can do big picture or little picture. Big picture is your very considered and intelligent overview of the socio-economic trends and movements that have created the scenario that I have just described. Or you can do little picture, which is why you eat so much crud. And part of the answer to that I've just provided to you is that there's not an awful lot of choice. So, 0345 6060 973. Why are we, and let's confine it to start with to the roads, but then we can move for the second bit of the question, maybe move into schools and hospitals as well. Because the second bit of the question is, would you mind awfully comparing us with another country? Because, look, laziness doesn't work. Lots of people are lazy in lots of countries. There's plenty of lazy Frenchmen, loads of lazy Italian women. It's not just because we're lazy that we're eating all of this. I don't even know, Ronan suggests we're importing too much. I don't know that we are. I think most of this stuff is going to be coming off factory production lines in the United Kingdom. Why are we so bad at it compared to other countries? And in order to prove the point of the first question, would you mind awfully comparing us to other countries? 0345 6060 973. So, if you go to hospital in Spain, what's the food like? If you go to school in France, what's the food like? If you stop at a roadside services in Italy, what's the food like? 0345 60. In fact, I've probably done it the wrong way round. But hey ho, in for a penny. Why are we so awful at this? And what's it like everywhere else? 0345 6060 973. 21 minutes after 11 is the time. We'll get stuck into this, but a quick word on something that's unfolding while we concern ourselves with other matters. And this is an important story, but it's not, I don't think at the moment, I can't see how it could be a phone-in that we could engage in together. But the public inquiry into the Novichok poisonings in 2018 gets underway this morning, and it will contain the name of a woman whose name is not said enough. That woman is Dawn Sturgis, who was killed by the nerve agent, by the poison that was brought here by Vladimir Putin's henchman. That would be Nigel Farage's favourite politician, Vladimir Putin, of course, or the one that he admires the most. And it is extraordinary to me that even after that happened, you remember what Boris Johnson did on his way back from a NATO summit where it was under discussion. Stopped off for a party with a former KGB spy. No such thing as former KGB spies. How do you know that? Vladimir Putin said so. Just an indication of the political, the geopolitical equivalent of, oddly, what we're talking about with regard to Monster Munch and Ginster's pasties. I know what you're thinking. What the hell is he talking about now? But it's about, and it ties in with the first hour as well, it's about boiled frogs. It's about what can happen to a country when the dial is turned up very, very gently. So that by the time that Dawn Sturgis was murdered in Salisbury, the idea, partly because Brexit, of course, saw people who should have known better running at a million miles away from the idea that Vladimir Putin was exercising undue influence over events in Britain. A whole bunch of reasons why. But the simple fact of the matter is that we put up with stuff today that we never would have put up with 10 years ago because the dial has been slowly turned up over the course of 10 years. And I think that's true in international politics at least as much as it is in the context of food. And no, when I started off telling you about the fact that the public inquiry is just getting underway into those Novichok poisonings, I didn't realise I was going to be able to tie it into the conversation that we're having about pasties and Monster Munch. But here we are. Andre is in Sutton. Andre, what would you like to say?
Good morning. I would like to say, in regards to the ultra-processed food, that people in the UK are buying it and they are asking for it. That's why it's on the shelves.
Oh, so you've gone for chicken and egg on this. So if we managed to invade the shelves of France, they'd all be living on cocktail sausages and cheese and onion pasties by tea time tomorrow.
Not necessarily. No, but for example, Iceland is thriving in the UK while it's not present in France or Romania, where I'm from, or Poland.
What's the food like in Romania? What's a typical school meal in Romania?
Sandwiches.
Well, that's not working then. That's not a very good. That's not a fine exemplar of healthier food. So because it's here we eat it, but that doesn't quite work.
Yes,
Something must have happened in the past where we moved from healthy food to unhealthy food.
Yes, because it's easier to cook. That's why. So you put something frozen in the oven for 30 minutes. It comes out perfect.
Yeah, but we're talking about motorway service stations now, so no one's cooking that. I mean, I think there's probably something there in the context of the bigger picture, convenience, but it's not that hard to cook a proper meal. And that's not the phone-in that we're having, because that is a slightly different phone-in, Andre. This is about stopping on the road and buying a load of old rubbish. Disgusting but delicious is probably the phrase I would go for, and that might be part of the answer. But why is this country so measurably worse than other countries? And for the benefits of comparisons, other European countries. 25 minutes after 11 is the time. Alex is in Lambeth. Alex, what do you reckon?
It's one of those things. Me and my partner, we travelled through Italy recently, and
very nice.
We stopped off. It was lovely, yeah. We stopped off, grab some petrol, grab a bite to eat, and the only thing we could really offer was anything fresh cooked, which was absolutely mind-blowing to us.
Well, in a service station?
In a service station, yeah. There was a sort of a counter with a couple guys behind it, fresh arancini, and you had to wait for your time. And
fresh arancini?
It was slightly frustrating from a British point of view that it wasn't quick grab-and-go food, Waiting 5 minutes for something hot, tasty was almost mind-blowing to us. And we kind of looked at it as, well, it's education at the heart. You go from your quick, easy school meals, which are, fired at you as a kid, and you think, oh, this is amazing, it's something delicious or whatever, you perceive it as delicious. And in reality, it's like you say, processed. It's mass processed.
How old are you?
I'm 20. God, no, I'm not 23. I'm 33.
33. And you've never known it any different. I'm not sure I have.
So, I mean, I'm sort of blessed that I went to a private school and I had, there was a mass caterer there who did, hot, fresh meals with different things offered out, cooked veg and all of that.
It's a 20-year difference in our ages. You wouldn't give what I got at boarding school, you wouldn't give it to pigs. No, you really wouldn't. I mean, it was almost unbelievably disgusting. There was one kid who ate so many Monster Munches, not Monster Munches, pot noodles. He ate so many pot noodles because we were all hungry all the time. He ate so many pot noodles, his inside seized up and they had to take him to hospital to dig it out. Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong, we could get hold of that stuff, but it wasn't free. You'd have to go out and pay for it yourself. You look at the average spend of a meal in the UK for a child versus the average spend of a meal in France.
So cut the costs so that the companies providing it can increase their profits. How much were you paying in Italy for a nice roadside hot meal?
I paid €5 for an arancini.
So what, for one arancini?
Yeah.
So it's quite big,
huge.
though.
It's the size of my fist.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's like a massive Scotch egg. In fact, it looks like a Scotch egg for people who don't know what an arancini is.
Yeah, the average cost of a meal, I think, in France is something like €7.30 for a day.
So what have we done? I mean, we've bought into the convenience of it, but as you say, I mean, for people who don't know, an arancini is like a rice ball. It's absolutely delicious. So I think traditionally you use leftover risotto, roll it in some breadcrumbs and deep fry it. So, it's not a salad by any stretch of the imagination. It's very heavy on carbs, but it isn't ultra processed. It's freshly made. It's there. And, there'll be mushroom in it or cheese. I don't think you could live on them without putting on some lumber. But the difference between that and the disgusting but delicious stuff that we normally fuel up on here is the difference between chalk and cheese. It's extraordinary, really. So you couldn't. So there was nothing in packets, Alex, at all.
There was the odd thing, but nobody was going for it. You've got your usual crisps and stuff, but everybody was sort of
got so much choice.
Diverging that. We were sat in front of a nun and a priest who were eating almost their lunch, I think. It's like they've
just gone there deliberately because the food was nice and reasonably priced, and somebody somewhere is making a killing out of the bad stuff while killing us, and that will be part of the answer to the question. But how do you put the brakes on it? Of course, it's not helped by all these Tufton Street vampires dedicating huge amounts of secretly funded quotes research end quotes to why we shouldn't have government intervention in these areas and why it's a bad idea to use carrots and sticks, legislatively speaking, to encourage us to stop pouring nonsense down our necks. It's coming up to 11:30. A lot of you want to talk about this, actually, so I should shut up a bit and listen more. I'll do that, I promise, after Jenny Barsby brings you the very latest news headlines. 32 minutes after 11, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. This is a special message for Layla. Please stop sending me pictures of your manky old ham sandwich, all right? You've sent it, once is enough, but why would you send it twice? I don't want to see it in the first place. But I take your point. It supports the notion that we buy all sorts of mank. Can I use the word mank in that context? We buy all sorts of muck. Go to Italy and you're getting hot food. I've had a complaint. Keith, start the tape. I've had a complaint. James, says the complainer. It's arancino. Arancini is plural. It's a very good point. And this complainer adds, I knew there had to be something wrong with you when Robert Jenrick started slagging you off. Well, you see, where Robert leads, where honest Bob leads, the rest will follow. There it is. Arancino, not arancini. But imagine that. Imagine pulling up at a petrol station on the M6, walking into the food area and being offered a selection of freshly cooked food. Not junk food, freshly cooked, healthy food, being cooked by someone who could tell you what was in it, as opposed to could tell you what freezer they'd got it out of. And I'm not being silly about it. Some of it will be convenience and all the rest of it and habit. I do understand that. But why are we so different from all of our closest allies? Allies? Neighbours. 0345 606 0973. Barry's in Sunningdale. Barry, what do you reckon?
James, good morning. Great show as usual.
It's all right.
I've just come back after a road trip. Every year we do road trips across Europe, and we drove across going on the road train, and we travelled through France. We then went down through Burgundy. We go to my friend's place in Como, where we stay. But
Good
then
Lord.
we travelled through Austria. it's a great way of having a holiday. And then we travel back through Switzerland, or we go through Switzerland into Italy. Then we go back from Italy through Austria. Then we come back through Germany, and then we come back through Belgium. So it's European car trips every year, taking a nice couple of cars and then enjoying yourselves. But obviously spending a lot of money in garages, filling up with petrol,
right.
and enjoying breaks, and also enjoying the food, which each country, you go through each country, you try their different regional foods. And in terms of the quality, in terms of the ingredients, in terms of the prices, all so much better than if you're travelling up the M1 or the M40 and going into your normal place. Well, I just think people in Europe take more care, and they think a lot more of food. In France, everybody stops work at 12 o'clock and has a 2-hour lunch break.
So if I was a Daily Telegraph columnist, Barry, I'd now ask why you hate Britain.
I love Britain.
No, how can you say that? Why don't you go and eat a sausage with your German friends then, slagging off Britain? But you're right, we're rubbish at this. We're just rubbish at this. We are. But why are we rubbish at it?
I just think that we tend to spend more money on houses and more money living rather than
But you weren't spending.
eating.
You weren't spending through the nose for your snacks in Belgium or Burgundy, were you? You were. It was perfectly reasonable, comparable to a pasty and a packet of Monster Munch, a tin of Coke and a Snickers. I bet when you added it all up, you're getting the same for much better food.
I think you're right. And I think the problem is that most people don't travel enough, and most people don't understand that you can get a lot better service, a lot better food.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Barry. What is your snack of choice when you are on the M1?
Well, if I'm on the M1, I wouldn't normally, a little bit like you, I wouldn't go and get a packet of crisps. I tend to avoid the travel. I'd fill up with petrol, but I'd usually fill up off the motorway, but I would just stop and maybe get a Costa coffee. Okay. I would stop for a coffee, but I wouldn't have a lunch, I wouldn't have a dinner. But
if you're very hungry, what are you going to do, Barry?
If I'm very hungry, you haven't got much choice, have you?
Exactly.
You haven't. You'd have to come off the motorway, and you'd have to go.
So what I'm doing is I'm pointing out it's not our fault, because I enjoyed your Britain-hating rant a moment ago. I enjoyed your attack upon British values. Some people struggle to, but we don't have any choice. So everyone's like you. If I'm in Germany or France, I'm going to enjoy I can't imagine that you ever walk into an Italian service station, see a lovely arancino with your name on it, and think to yourself, "Do you know what I really fancy? A packet of Quavers." It's not going to happen, is it? But if you're in this country, you're only going to get offered the Quavers.
I think you can get, if you go into a service station, the problem is if you go into Europe, you can, as well as getting the decent food off the deli, which is all fresh and lovely, you can also get your packet of Quavers, because the big multinational food companies are selling food not just in this country, but in Europe. And you can get a Nestle bar of chocolate or packet of crisps, because you know it's going to be the same as if you're getting in a service station.
Yeah, a bit homogenous. Have you ever been to the southbound services at Gloucester?
Not recently, but I do travel. I'm in the road haulage industry and transport, so I travel a lot.
Take it from me. Take it from me, mate. Knock your socks off. I mean, it is much more like what we would associate with other European countries. Family owned, local produce. I think they only use stuff that's within a 30-mile radius. 130 different producers, farmers, growers, butchers, bakers. And it's a completely different proposition. They've been there for about 10 years. I hope they're still there, Barry. I haven't checked for a while, but they've been there for about 10 years. If they can make it work, then anyone can make it work. But pull over on whatever journey you undertake next, and the choice will be very, very limited. I love that. What's your favourite out of all the countries you visited on this trip? Where did you get the best roadside food?
Italy. I think somebody also mentioned Italy earlier, but if you're in Italy, even in the motorway services, you can pay €1.50 for a cup of coffee on a motorway service station.
And it's decent coffee.
You get the best Italian coffee, and it's fresh coffee. And you can also have something with it, whether it's a biscuit or whatever, and it's just beautiful.
Nicely put. I think T-Bay as well, further north from Gloucester. I think it might even be the same people. But it certainly sets similar standards. And Cameron is the only person whose sense of humour is identical to mine. After I ran through that list of suppliers, he said, "Don't they have any candlestick makers?" Barry, take care. Bon voyage. Belinda is in Eastbourne. Belinda, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
My parents were Spanish immigrants to England. and they really resisted the American fast food culture that was coming into the UK. They really clung to their continental food heritage. And I would say that the UK has embraced American fast food culture.
So I'm looking the wrong way. I'm looking at Europe asking questions. I should be looking at America and getting answers.
Well, the thing is, it's aspirational here and liberating to buy fast food, whereas on the continent, it's really resisted. On the continent, you aspire to cook. Here, you aspire not to cook. And on the continent...
Why is that? That's a beautiful phrase. I'll be nicking that and passing it off as my own in the future. Why do we aspire not to? Because it makes us feel wealthy or successful.
Possibly. I don't know. You'd have to ask yourselves. But
Hang on. No, I don't know either, actually. I just asked myself.
Because you aspire to
I want to be a cook. I aspire to being a cook. I want to be a good cook. I don't aspire to... But maybe as a kid I did. Mum would cook and I would want Finder's French bread pizza because I thought that was what pop stars ate.
And you didn't have an apple, right? You had to go in and find an apple.
Yeah.
My mum would never be caught out like that. She'd always make if we were travelling, she'd make sandwiches, she'd make bits and bobs, we'd have apples. It's a priority.
It was a treat to have that stuff, and then as you got older, it stopped being a treat because you could have it all the time. So it'd be so Mum would cook the most delicious food. She could do anything with mince, my mum, Belinda, absolutely anything. And chili con carne, bolognese, shepherd's pie, and then, but when you got like a Finder's crispy pancake or a French bread pizza or something out of the freezer, it felt like a treat. So you aspire to the treat. I'm doing what you told me to do. I'm asking myself the question rather than you. And it felt like a treat. And then as you got older, and you could have a treat all the time because it still felt like a treat, but it wasn't a treat. The worst word in the whole of this conversation is treat. Treat.
What's happened, I think what fast food has done has infantilized the nation and made them dependent on all these treats. And the thought that you might want to actually... fishes for yourself is not a treat.
You are smacking it out of the park today. What was the first thing you said? Aspire to what? I'm writing this down.
Liberating. You're aspiring to liberate to.
Oh, the phone line's gone fun. So in European countries they aspire to cook, and we aspire to buy. To aspire to. I'm going to check the tape on this. Can we get global? Can I use Global Player live on air? Can we look into this? I'd like to rewind this and listen back to some of what Belinda said a minute ago. And then the second bit you said was that ultra processed food or junk food has infantilized us because we keep thinking, oh please mum, can we have a Finder's crispy pancake instead of having your mum's delicious shepherd's pie? What about you? Do you now straddle both cultures, your parents' inheritance, but also the British obsession with junk food, or have you stayed clean?
Junk food. I cook from scratch every day. I take my own sandwiches and...
Viva España. On the continent, here's what you said. Here's what you said. I've got to go because the phone line's driving me nuts, Belinda. It's not your fault. It was fine to start with. Here's what you said. On the continent, you aspire to cook. Here, you aspire not to cook. If you add that to the line about us all being infantilized by junk food, you're pretty close to... So then the question of how did we let this happen remains. 11:43, 11:44. Elena's in Prague. Elena, what would you like to say?
Hello, Dane.
Hello, Elena.
I think it's a lot related about... Sorry, I'm very nervous.
What can I do? What can I do to put you at your ease? Shall I sing you a song?
I think it's a lot about related to cuisines and the way we are taught to eat.
Yes.
So, for instance, when I'm Bulgarian. I've lived in the UK for many, many years. But when I was at school, we had cooked meal at lunch.
In Bulgaria?
Yes.
Right. Well, we have cooked meal. Well, they're not very good cooked meals. So you just get into the habit of having a substantive meal at lunchtime.
Yeah. And also, I think with kind of adding to the previous caller, for example, my generation and the generations before me, they can't kind of, they don't like fast food, I don't think.
What? Where?
Sorry?
Where? In Bulgaria or in Britain?
Bulgaria, yeah.
Right, so, okay. So they aspire to cook. They don't aspire not to cook.
Yeah. And I think it's very much related to this.
I think you're right. What's it like in Prague?
So in Prague is very interesting because when I kind of moved here, I was like, why don't you have a sandwich for lunch?
Yeah.
But here, everyone has a cooked meal and kind of a heavier meal or larger meal, always starting with a soup.
Good Lord.
And it's like a tradition where they, for dinner, would have something lighter, sweet.
Well, that's better for you anyway. And what about roadside in Bulgaria? If I'm on a road trip and I pull over for some food, what will I get?
So in Bulgaria, you will see a lot of barbecues on the side of the road.
Really?
And and everyone is really surprised, and they think that the
you mean barbecue like shops? You don't mean just someone's pulled over and lit a fire?
You.
So I can go and say, "I'll buy one of your delicious sausages, please."
Yeah.
And are they what, in caravans, like in lay-bys, or are they in proper roadside service areas?
They are usually on proper roadside service areas.
Well, you live and learn.
Yeah, it's completely normal for us.
And yet here we are. I just always presumed the whole world was like we are, but we're the poor relation, aren't we?
So it's very normal, and people stop. And you can also go into the restaurant and have a warm soup if you want to, and kind of other meals that are not necessarily from the barbecue.
Unless you're in Spain, in which case you can have a cold soup. But I generally prefer a warm soup, actually. Yes.
Or in Bulgaria, we also have a cold soup for the summer, which is really nice. And you can also have it in a roadside restaurant.
This is actually embarrassing, really. The more you think about what we put up with and why. And in the mind of many people listening to this, we've still got that word treat. Although some clever close pointed out, actually, I think you'll find they're called peanut M&Ms these days. But you've still got that word treat in the back of your mind. And we think we're having a treat when we pull over. We could be having fresh Bulgarian barbecue. Poor old them eating their delicious fresh food and healthy meals and nice soup. Soup? That is conditioning, is it? Is it advertising? I don't even know. But Elena, thank you. I don't know what you were nervous about. It was a brilliant contribution. It's 11:51. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And maybe cost is relevant as well. A few of you pointing out that a couple of the places I have praised are particularly expensive. The question really of why this country has such an appalling track record in this field is one that I invite you to answer. 0345 60 60 973 is the number that you need if you want to have a crack at doing that. So, I mean, there's chicken and egg here, not literally, obviously, but there's definite chicken and egg in the context of choice and convenience and what we have and what we do. But is there chicken and egg in the context of why other countries have gone in a different direction? What happened here then? Would it be that line from Brenda was brilliant, wasn't it? The British... in Europe, they aspire to cook. In Britain, we aspire not to cook. Was that? I mean, you had rationing in other countries, I presume, of some kind. Did you? I mean, was it coming out of the Second World War and thinking that shop bought? I always remember cake. Do you remember cake, Mr. Kipling cake? Shop bought cake was a bigger treat than a cake that your mum baked. So you take that as your starting point, and you move into shop bought, for which you now translate into ultra processed. Ultra-processed food, shop-bought food, makes you feel better. So you aspire to the stuff that's actually really bad for you. But why didn't that happen in other countries? Darren is in Lowestoft. Darren, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James. I'd just like to give you a slightly different perspective. I lived and worked in Thailand for about 20 years.
Oh, yes.
So I had quite a lot of experience of the petrol stations or gasoline stations, as they call them there. A little bit like your last caller, there's lots of sort of one-man bands setting up outside of the petrol station. They're selling barbecue. You can get pad thai, pad krapao, any sort of local Thai dishes, all freshly prepared at the roadside, normal cost.
So it's street food, really, that you're describing, isn't it?
basically street food, and the price, you've just been talking about price, normally between about £1 and £1.50 for a meal.
I mean, that's got as much to do with the exchange rate as anything else. But I take your point. So we've corporatized everything, haven't we? That's part of it. It's everything is big business squeezing out little businesses. There was little chefs when I was growing up, but they would have closed. They would have taken over from smaller, independent, family-run places, and then economies of scale. The more outlets you've got, the more effort you put into shaving stuff off the cost, turning down the prices, and yet I can't put a date on it. Can you?
No, I'm about the same age as you.
There's no golden age, is there? We don't look back and think we used to pull over at that. I mean, a massive treat for us growing up was the Little Chef.
Oh, completely. I'm 51, so
yeah, there it is.
Same as you. So yeah. But no, I think it is the big corporations, whereas it literally is the mum and pops that set up outside the petrol station.
And they do that, letting small businesses. I mean, that would be great as well. I mean, people might be tempted. I don't know. We're never going to work out. Does your surname begin with G?
No, K, King.
All right. So Tessa just texted to say, if that's Darren Gittins, would you say hello from me?
No, Darren King, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm going to be making a habit of this kind of bespoke communication service between two different listeners, Darren, unless, of course, it had been by an amazing coincidence, in which case we might have launched a new feature that would last until about Tea Time Tuesday. Darren, stay safe. Nabila is in Greenford. Nabila, what do you reckon? What's going on here? Why are we so rubbish?
Hi. Do you know what, James? I'm not actually sure of the full picture. However,
go on.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yes.
Me as a profession, I am a private cook, so I actually, make my crust on cooking for people who don't have time to cook.
Oh, very nice.
And it's a massive thing that is growing at the moment, on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I started off cooking for gyms, making meal plans for clients, and it's now just grown to the point where I can't even figure out what I'm doing day to day. I'm so busy trying to keep other people healthy and, making it convenient for them.
So what do you do? Do you fill their freezers, or do you actually go around and cook while they're watching telly?
I fill their fridges and freezers. I've even got people who literally take my food abroad with them on an aeroplane because they want to stay so strict on what their diet is.
What sort of food do you cook? What's your speciality?
Oh gosh, a bit of everything. So I love Asian inspired food. I love a bit of Thai, a little bit of curries. I love Italian as well. But my whole crux is the healthy thing. So I'm trying to keep people on their calorie counts and on their little macronutrients. And like I said, a lot of my clients are high earners. They're struggling to find that time to be able to put things together
really,
themselves.
Though? You've got this high earners in other countries. Are they really struggling? What are they doing instead?
I think where we are quite lazy, to be honest with you. We love to swipe right, to tap, to stick it in the basket and, check out.
I've got a theory.
Go on.
I blame the aristocracy.
You know what? I might be with you on that one, James.
It's because we are such a deferential population, right? That we've got it baked into our DNA that if you're successful, you don't do anything. You've got people serve
Silver
you,
spoon.
people wait on you, people. So obviously, most people can't afford a private chef or a butler, but what they can do, they can afford food that involves no effort whatsoever.
Oh yeah,
and that makes them feel like big shots. That makes them feel like Billy Big Bananas. So they end up living, and then you throw in a little bit of Mr. Kipling and Finder's crispy pancakes, and you've got this idea that buying stuff rather than making stuff makes you feel like an aristocrat, and that is why we are different from all the other countries that got rid of their royal families and beheaded all their aristocrats.
It's a good point you just made there, James, and I was following on from that lovely lady caller whose family were from the Spanish heritage.
They aspire to cooking. They aspire to cook. We aspire not to cook.
That conversation made me want to call in because it's exactly that. We want somebody to drive us, somebody to clean for us, somebody to cook for us, somebody to tie our shoelaces for us, and all the rest of it.
There's something in this. And then in other countries, it doesn't work that way. The idea of letting somebody out, I mean, could that be it? That could be.
I mean, my parents are from a Moroccan background. My other half is from a Polish background, and we are,
Have you got more in common with each other culinarily than you have with the average Brit?
I believe so, yeah. Everything's done from scratch. Everything's done from scratch. All your pastes, all your sauces, your garlics, chops. You don't buy jarred minced garlic or, pre-made spices. It is literally from whole food, raw ingredient to the table.
Minced garlic. I saw that the other day. I bought some frozen ginger and garlic paste when I'm making a curry. So, but don't hate me. No, I usually do my own. It gets under my fingers. By the time I've finished with the garlic, I can still smell it on Tuesday if I cook it on Saturday night. But I don't.
Look, it's a step up because at least you're not buying the 3-minute microwave meal. So it's a step up.
I'm doing fine. This is one area where I'm not. Well, apart from on the road. So when you're on the road.
Yep. I'm a picnicker. I
do
make
you take your
scratch.
own food? Oh, you'll get
Take
you.
my own
Stop
food.
virtue signalling.
Cook my own drumsticks, make my own sandwiches. The only thing I don't do is make bread. Yeah.
So if you pull over for petrol, you don't even go. You don't even buy anything except petrol.
I'll get literally a coffee or a bottle of water. Everything else is already packed up. I've got my cooler bag, my ice packs, the whole shebang.
But it's so much better than what we've got. It's so bizarre. But again, when we were kids, if Mum said we're going to have a picnic, you'd be like, "Oh no!"
We were really excited.
Why can't we go to the Little Chef? Yeah.
I remember my mum used to take us to Brent Cross when we were really. When my mum had 5 kids, so we were like little ducks in a row kind of thing. We used to take a little picnic with us to Brent Cross, and we used to sit around the fountain and eat our sandwiches and have our
you'd
little
rather have done that than go to Wimpy.
Oh God, memories. They're all there. I remember my sister falling in the fountain trying to get a willy boot after a picnic, and things like that wouldn't have happened if we were sat in the Little Chef. Do you know what I mean?
I do know. Yeah, you wouldn't have got a lolly at the end either, which has probably inculcated all sorts of bad habits for my generation. Do you want to mention the business, or are you too busy?
No, it's not that. It's just I'm a private cook, so people find me. It's really weird. I work on referrals. I don't even advertise, so they just find me.
So what you're saying very politely is you can stick your free advert where the sun don't shine, James.
No, never that.
Stick it in your air fryer. Thank you, Nabila. It's coming up.
Thank you for your time, Joe.
I love that. I love that conference. Not just with Nabila. Do you know the switchboard's still full? Loads of people, every single line, still waiting. I will come back to this. It's one of my all-time favourite subjects. Another one of my all-time favourite subjects that I don't think we're going to do next is it's 9.4 million people who are economically inactive. The latest wizard wheeze that they've come up with is to offer discounted driving lessons to care providers in the hope of getting them back. Well, maybe we will talk about that. I haven't quite decided yet. But I'm drawn also to the impossibility of being Superwoman. This is a real thing for my age and generation. Not for me, Keith. That was impossible for all manner of reasons. But the idea that you could, as a woman, have it all appears to have sort of withered on the vine. 4 minutes after 12 is the time. There may be some crossover with this conversation and the last one, actually, in terms of that notion of what it is that we aspire to. So I'll give you the headline. Superwoman is dead. Professionals advise against aiming for perfect work-life balance. And sometimes my favourite conversations are the ones where I'm not quite sure what the conversation is about. I'm not quite sure what that means. I'll tell you something for nothing, that the experience and the understanding of this issue will really change according to whether you're male or female. It doesn't mean that, every family is the same or that every opinion is entrenched, but the notion of what a work-life balance is, I think, is going to be very gender-specific. I really do. We'll get stuck into that shortly. But if I tell you... So how much attention do you pay to the programme? In terms of, if you had to make a list of my most hackneyed, popular anecdotes, the stories I've told most often over the years, or the illustrations that I use, whether analogous or amusing, to make more important points. If I told you the one about the therapist... not my therapist, the one about the New York therapist. What would you think? Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you know what I'm talking about, Keith? You pay quite a bit of attention sometimes. Tuesdays usually, is it? The New York therapist, because there's a story in the news today, and it's a story set in Sandbanks, which is that sort of incredibly luxurious little enclave on the south coast, or down south. And it is almost, if it is being accurately reported, it is almost the real-life version of my favourite story about aspiration and wealth. I shall share it with you shortly, but I just want to see whether or not anyone can actually, because I haven't told that one for ages. It's not mine. It's I can't remember who told me. I think it's a well-established trope about wealth and satisfaction, but there's a lovely story that appears to prove the point in real life. But that's not what we're going to talk about. Here's what we are going to talk about. I'm a big fan of Charlene White. You'll know her from her ITV presenting duties, and hopefully, you might know her from Loose Women, although you should really be listening to Sheila when Loose Women is on, so you may not. And she has sort of gone there in a way that I think many people listening right now might welcome. She said a lot of parents, especially women, that's what I meant about there being a gender distinction here, but it's only an especially, not an exclusively. A lot of parents, especially women, are told that we need to think about work-life balance. Whereas actually, if we focus too much on that, we consistently live in a state of guilt. I don't think about work-life balance, I just do the best I can. This comes after the chief executive of a big financial services company, it's on the Fortune 500, said that work-life balance is a lie. She revealed that she gives her children approximately 30% of her time. She said, if you live your life like a diversified portfolio, just like with your money, over time you will outperform. On any given day, I may not feel like I'm the best mommy. There's days I don't feel like I'm a great CEO, but over time I'm a really good mum, and over time I believe that I'm doing a great job. But this is the line that struck me most from the founder of a recruitment business. Feeding younger women the lie that they can have it all is dangerous. It's essential women take off those rose-tinted glasses because the myth makes women believe they're deficient. You need to make trade-offs when the different parts of your life require more attention at different times. And I want you to talk to me about that moment, if you like, of realization. What that mis-selling looks like as a purchaser. I mean, there's a lot going on here. There's 3 or 4 different strands of conversation, but the central thrust is that you'd start with votes for women, I suppose, but you'd really begin this story with work, with the idea of the workplace being opened to women in a way that previous generations didn't experience. So giving up work almost as a matter of routine when you became a mother. That was still relatively more normal in the 1970s. And before that, I think it was more common than not. But in the course of my lifetime, it has become clearer and clearer that it is, well, on the one hand, it's no longer an option economically. It's no longer an option fiscally. As in, everything about our society is built in a way that almost demands 2 incomes, unless you are extraordinarily wealthy or extraordinarily poor. The general business of staying afloat involves 2 incomes, a man and wife in straight couples. And that's changed. So that is a relatively new development, by which I simply mean that is something that has happened in the course of my lifetime. And then you had that extraordinarily it wasn't quite misogynistic, but it was profoundly unhelpful to women, I think, to start talking about the way that women could have it all. There's always someone in the city who had like 17 children and ran a FTSE 100 company, and she'd be held up routinely. Not just one person. The trope would come along quite regularly as proof that you could run a home like, you could have a kitchen like Nigella Lawson's or Delia Smith's. You could have a house that looked like the housekeeping staff at Claridge's had just left, and you could hold down an amazing job. And do you know what? At the time, I missed about that, and my wife pointed it out to me 100 years ago. It never mentioned men. That whole trope, that whole mythology of Superwoman never mentioned men. It was all about how you could have the business and the family and the home life. What the hell am I supposed to be doing in the meantime? Watching telly while you warm my slippers in the bottom of the Arga? No. However tempting that may sound, that is not the way that the conversation was ever done. So I remember thinking, and it was one of the conversations we used to have on this programme long before Brexit came along and ruined everything, where we used to get stuck in more to some of these issues, these shared experience-based issues, these social change type of issues. And it was extraordinary how the whole Superwoman story excluded men, ignored men. And I don't mean that in a poor men kind of way. I mean it in the opposite kind. How can you possibly have a story about household management, child rearing and income, which focuses exclusively on one half of a couple and completely ignores the other one? So we discovered relatively quickly that it was still a fairly unlevel playing field, and that if one person was going to give up work for a couple of years in order to make sure that there was someone at home for the children, it would probably be the one that earned less, and that would usually, 20 years ago, that would usually be the woman. I don't think that's true anymore. I think that quite a lot of the wage inequality, looking at the statistics at least, has evened out as well. So the word superwoman as a shorthand for somebody who has the career and the family was never actually very helpful to women, because it was an unachievable goal in many ways, and it created a sense of guilt. And it's the sense of guilt I want to talk about, or rather it's the sense of guilt that I want you to talk to me about. As Charlene White describes it as living in a state of guilt, because look, I'm going to put words in your mouth now. I'm thinking that you are putting effort into the job, and that makes you feel guilty about not being with the children or not putting effort into the children. And then something I hadn't thought about before is the corollary of that. When you're putting effort into the children, knowing that if you were actually putting that effort into the job, then the job would be going better. I suspect this is doubly true if you're running your own business. So is it possible? Because it's one of the most extraordinarily, I've used that word a lot today. Do you know, I've used the word extraordinarily often on today's programme. I shall try and stop now. But I think we might be knocking at the door now of recognising that work-life balance is nowhere near as meaningful a phrase as we've spent 20 years thinking it is. So work-life balance for a man was always about making room for children in your life and not coming home and turning on the news, putting your feet up and just sort of grunting at the family. Work-life balance was supposed to be the difference between living to work and working to live, right? Work-life balance for a woman, what on earth did that mean? It meant that whenever you were working, you should be feeling guilty about not doing the family. And whenever you were doing the family, you should be feeling guilty about not doing the work. I just want to know about your journey on this. 0345 6060 973. What does work? There is no such thing as a perfect work-life balance. When did you realise that? How did you realise that? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. And how much guilt is attached to the idea that you should be raising 407 children and running a FTSE 100 company, and that being a woman is absolutely no obstacle to achieving that? Because nothing ever stopped a man from having 5 kids and a big job, did it? That was possibly where some of this came from. But the reason why nothing ever stopped a man from having 5 kids and a big job was because a woman was usually doing all of the domestic heavy lifting while he went out. I told you, didn't I, once? We sat down at a dinner table, and with a straight face, a bloke said to us that I bring home the bacon and she cooks it. And she chuckled, she giggled, and you're always a little bit wary of sitting in judgment on other people's relationships, because you never know, do you, what's going on behind closed doors, or and you don't really have the right to tell people that you've got it right and they've got it wrong. But I always found that, I don't know, I depressing, I think. I always found it slightly depressing. But there's no work-life balance issues there. So the idea, and this is where I think it comes from. Oh, I love it when I work stuff out live on air. You probably think I should do all this before the show starts. So what I think we did was we sort of, did we tell women, you can be just like men? You see that bloke over there? He's got a big job and a big family, or he's got a job and a family. He manages to balance his job and his family. You can be like that as well. But we never said in order to do so, you'd need a wife. In order to do that, you'd need a traditional wife. So we sold you this idea of work-life balance using the male model, not like Nick Gandy or whatever his name is, but the male model, as in the male example, David Gandy, the male example of how you can have a work-life balance without actually saying, oh, by the way, you'll also need a wife. You'll also need a partner to do the heavy lifting in the areas that you won't be able to do, because it is actually impossible to do both. I can't believe that I was today years old when I worked that out. And to be fair, it's a nice article in the paper today by one of my favourite journalists, but it doesn't quite reach the parts that we've just reached. I mean, some of it does. This is a quote from someone who's 60. I sent my children to nursery when they were 3 months old. I'm 60 and I still feel the guilt because I'll never get that time back with them. But no men feel that way. No men feel guilty because the children went to nursery. And the reason why the children went to nursery is because you needed both incomes to pay the mortgage on the house that you both live in. So the whole work-life balance story here is about the myth of telling one partner that they could be just like the other partner without mentioning that the other partner needed the other partner in order to be the other partner. Are you still with me at the back? But I'm a man, so what do I know? 0345 606 0973. The work-life balance was always a myth because it completely ignored the fact that in order for women to be like men, they would need somebody fulfilling the role traditionally fulfilled by the wife. I don't mean a trad wife. I find that phrase really sad, actually. But that's that. Crikey. So how did you realise? Why are you sitting there going, oh, well done, James, better late than never? What happened and how did it affect you? Talk to me about guilt. Talk to me about balance, reality, unachievable goals. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. It's 12:17. 12:19 is the time. Emma says, I think you've hit upon a capital solution there, James. Every woman needs to be issued with her own wife immediately. Please form an orderly queue. And that, I'd always struggled with it. Listen, lads, it wasn't an attempt to tell women that they didn't need men. That might be what you heard. But the whole superwoman thing was always about married women or women in relationships, the ones with the big city jobs. The husband was just sort of excused any agency or responsibility. I think we're a long way from a space where we need to start worrying about men's rights or the manosphere, if we're even vaguely honest about the way the world works. The message that women have been given for the last 30 or 40 years is that just like the man in your life, or just like your dad, not like your mum, just like your dad, you can have the job and the family. But what that completely ignored was that your dad had your mum doing a lot of the heavy lifting in one area and less in the other. 20 minutes after 12 is the time. Charlotte's in Carshalton. Charlotte, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. I have my own beauty salon. And I had my daughter, she's 8 years old now. I had my daughter and, you know, I took over the business probably when she was about 5 years old.
Right.
Ever since then, I've always been a career woman, but I've realised actually that it's so much harder to balance all of that and to have the guilt then that comes with it. It is really difficult. And now I'm pregnant with my second one, and I've realised that I can't do both of them because the guilt just overtakes. Well, as a mum,
there's three paths here, and you can only see two. So you either do what you do and feel guilty, or you change what you do and you don't feel guilty.
That's it.
I don't want to mansplain, but I think I've got a horrible feeling I'm about to. Or you carry on doing what you're doing, but learn how not to feel guilty about it.
Yeah, I think as a mother, I think that's impossible. I think there's always going to be the mum guilt, no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try. It's a different.
Is it though, or are you a subject of social conditioning? Why? I mean, what about the new one's dad? Why can't he step back from the workplace a bit, do a little bit more at home, so that you feel less, or would you feel less guilty? You might feel still guilty, even if it was your part. I'm presuming that there's a man in the frame. I don't know. That's a bit presumptuous of me, but why isn't he the one?
That's interesting as well because we'd split up at one point when I took over the business.
Right.
And so financially for me, there was no option, and there was no option for childcare or anything like that after we'd split up. But now we're back together again and things have been much better. Good. But he is still ultimately the breadwinner of the family.
And how guilty does he feel about that?
Business. I think it's very different. I think mothers naturally have that natural instinct where they want to be there for the children. We're much more emotional beings. When we have our children's needs.
Maybe, but I mean, it's a generalisation. What you say is true, but how much is chicken and how much is egg? How much of that is a consequence of the social conditioning that we've lived with for decades, for hundreds of years in some cases? And there are other societies that operate by different models, but ours certainly operates like this. And how much of it is some sort of innate I don't buy the innate bit, to be honest, as a dad. I think that if the cards had fallen differently in my family, you could be talking to my wife now on the radio, and our kids are older now, but when they were younger, I'd have been the one worrying about a lot more of the domestic issues going on at home. And I might have had to struggle with status issues or with kind of pride issues, but that's a me problem. That's not a family problem or a society problem.
No, I think it's also an industry problem as well, though. Workplace makes a huge difference, and naturally, with the nature of my job, hours are quite long.
You've
it's all
got to be there.
customer facing.
You feel you've got to be there as well because it's your
Whereas
business.
my partner, he works in an office. He's got flexible working. He works from home. They're very easy. If he needs to pick up one of the kids from school,
so
he
why
can just say, "Look,
why
I
are
need
you
to take
feeling
half
guilty?
an hour out."
Some people listening will think you've got it sorted. He can take up a little bit of slack when you're in the salon, and then it'll balance out over the course of the month. You can do the career, and you can and you raise a family together, and you do your different jobs separately.
Yeah, but I want to be able to do those things as well. That's the thing. Yeah, emotionally, I want to be there for her.
Fair enough.
There's
Did
times
you
where I'm
buy?
constantly on my phone.
Did
Go
you
on.
buy the Superwoman myth? Did you buy the idea not only that it was possible, but also that it's what you should be trying to do?
Oh, absolutely.
There it is.
Absolutely. I think career women, they're much more focused on work, but actually in the reality of then having a family at the same time, I'm personally found it really, really difficult. So I've actually decided to sell my business because I can't do it.
Well, good luck. I hope it all works out.
Thank you.
And I wonder whether 2 years from now we'll be having a conversation about other things, and you'll think that I'm not that it was a mistake, but that it was not quite the path that you were expecting it to be. Because that's the point about life, is that we make all of these big decisions and never have 100% certainty about what is actually going to happen as a result. You're going to have so much time on your hands, and when the youngest one starts school, you're going to have unbelievable amounts of time on your hands. We shall see. Nicola is in Camberley. Nicola, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, hiya. I think my guilt was slightly different. I sort of feel a little bit like I haven't lived up to my full potential career-wise, just because I did buy into it. Or, I worked really hard at school, went on and did a couple of degrees, started a successful career, and then kind of ducked out to have kids, kind of thinking I'd go back and just, on the same trajectory as probably just the men I saw around me. Looking back now, I didn't have many strong female mentors in my field. I was in TV production, and I just never went back.
Very hard to get back in after leaving to have children.
Yeah,
harder than
very
anyone
hard
tells
to get
you,
back.
I think, actually.
Well, nobody. Yeah, no.
Why guilt though?
I didn't think
Are you sure it's
childproof.
Are you sure it's guilt, not just sort of a bit of disappointment?
It's disappointment, and I think it's also guilt in the way that, my parents helped finance my education, and I feel like I'm not really doing a lot with it.
Well, are you talking to me?
Well, there's that. Yeah, there's that. Yeah.
But if you had gone back to work, and the career had carried on, and you'd managed to rediscover the trajectory you were on before you had the children, you'd be feeling guilty about not having spent enough time with them.
Absolutely. And
That's what I think this story is about, is that you, particularly as a woman, you just can't win in this space.
No, you can't. No, maybe there's some careers you can achieve more balance, but not particularly sort of demanding. I had to be away from home a lot. Yeah. I think I feel a little bit foolish that I didn't think earlier. I know I'm going to want children. How about I pick a career that's going to facilitate that? Because I didn't really give a lot of thought. I just went gung-ho into something I really wanted to do. Because there's no, it was all at school and university. You girls can do whatever you like. You're as good as the boys. You're as smart as the boys. All the opportunities are there for you.
And actually, it was mis-selling. It was a great mis-selling scandal. It's up there with PPI. Well, not everyone would agree with that, but I suspect the majority would. And again, it's going to be sector-specific or industry-specific. We're doing the thing, though, that we managed not to do in the last hour, which is we're presuming that the universe begins and ends at the borders of these islands, whereas In fact, in other countries, and I know I bang on a bit about Scandinavia, but that's because I have a little bit of experience of it, particularly Denmark. And my wife actually wrote an article when our kids were young about the difference between being a young working mother in Denmark and being a young working mother in Britain. And two things struck me. The first was the domestic balance, the way that there was no sort of sense that traditional roles must be adhered to. And the second was the employer role. The way in which employers acknowledged, A, that you were now just as likely to have a working mother on your payroll as you were a working father, and B, employers had some responsibility to help with that. So things like leaving early, 2 days a week, two days a week for the mother, 2 days a week for the father, wherever you were working. They weren't working in the same place. And better childcare. So a society that gears itself to increased equality is probably not the society that we've raised our children in, Nicola. It's coming up to 12:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Only Gary. And Gary is... I love Gary, but I don't think I can allow him, because he knows all my anecdotes. He knows them better than I do. He sometimes asks me what happened to... So I don't think I can let Gary be the one to actually remember what story I'm thinking of when I look at the millionaires battling it out for the tallest house on the street. So Gary's disqualified from including this. Speaking of disqualified, I'm told by quite a few of you actually that I've now used up my daily quotient of the phrase chicken and egg. I can't say that again. I wasn't keeping count, but it's good to know that you were. So what is the story from my archive, my limited archive of insightful and helpful anecdotes that speaks to the story published today of the millionaires battling it out to have the tallest house on the street? I'll tell you after the latest headlines with Amelia Cox. It is 33 minutes after 12. This is nice from Michaela. James, you've hit the nail on the head. Well, that's a first time for everything, I suppose. The work-life balance will always be a myth unless we change how we view work and change not just our attitudes but also practices. It's a great piece, this. A lovely little spot by Amelia Hill at the Guardian, looking at the question of whether or not Superwoman was ever an achievable goal. And I think with the help of your calls, we've gone a little further than the original piece did, actually, by establishing the fact that it ignored the old line about behind every great man there is a great woman, which is, a cliche for a reason. So you can be just like the man. You can fulfill the role traditionally fulfilled by the man without mentioning the role traditionally fulfilled by the woman played in the ascent of the man, as it were, or in the achievements of the man. A little more on this, and then there's an extraordinary story from one of my colleagues in the Northwest, which looks at how, again, a trigger warning for here. If you have experienced stillbirth in your life, you may find this a little tricky, but the discovery of a mass grave full of stillborn babies in Oldham is a story that really needs to be told in greater detail. And my colleague Chris Chambers from our Manchester office will join me shortly to do precisely that. But before that, we're looking at this question, this idea of is it as simple as this is one of those rare occasions where we've stumbled into the answer to the question quite early? The reason why, the whole idea of women being able to have it all, or Superwoman being dead, according to one headline, is simply because it was sold to you under false pretenses, and the false pretenses were you could achieve it without having a wife. Danielle's in St Albans. Danielle, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah, do you know what? It's really interesting, actually.
I hope so.
Talking to your... It's for a change. No, not for a change. It's always interesting.
Right, behave!
It's something I talk about a lot. I run my own business. I had my first son 8 years ago, and I wasn't able to go back to my job part-time. My flexible working request was denied. So I set up my own business, and I just think when you become a mother, you just automatically have this mum guilt. I can't quite describe it or explain it. And I was chatting to your producer earlier about, is it this innate thing that we have? My son recently, I was running an event last week, and it was quite important, and I wanted to be there. I needed to be there, and he came down with chickenpox literally the morning of the event. And I just remember having this real, guilt feeling of I should be staying with him as his mother. I should be the one to be looking after him rather than going to work.
Who was looking after him?
Well, my mother-in-law was due to come around that day anyway to look after him, but my partner was there.
And you said, and yet you still felt guilty.
Yeah,
How much of that is I don't think that's innate. I really don't. I think that's just the way the way society makes you feel.
Yeah, and I was
60 to
thinking
70% the way society makes you feel, rather than the way you would feel if, we'd grown up in a different society.
I think it's that judgment. I think that's where the guilt comes from. It's that feeling of being judged by people.
It usually is, isn't it? Where's that?
Yeah.
Who's judging you then? So on that day, who do you think was judging you?
Potentially people who I was at the event with, thinking, why isn't she at home with her kids? Or my mother-in-law, she should be at home with her child.
I thought you were going to say mother-in-law first then. I think because she would have been part of a very different model when she was raising your partner.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't believe in the kind of the balance. I don't think it exists. I think you're, 1 week you could be, brilliant at parenting and doing all the arts and crafts and the things with your kids, and then the next week you could be doing really well with, your business or work. I genuinely don't think. Well, I haven't experienced anyway them both going amazingly at the same time, and I think it's that high expectation that we feel that we have to live up to, and when we're not doing something right, then that whole,
Yeah, but this is the bit of the conversation I wasn't one of the bits I wasn't expecting, because I don't know whether or not if look, because the first thing you said was that the job that you used to be doing didn't take into account your changing circumstances at all. So that's part of the guilt ultimately, because it's as if you're the square peg trying to fit into a round hole, socially speaking. And in fact, if employers were a lot more on the ball about this sort of stuff, then one of the foundation stones of the guilt that kicks in later would not be there, because you wouldn't. But without the guilt. And that's where the male example should really kick in, because although, you can look back on your life and wish that you'd spent a little bit more time with your children, it's going to be very much the optional stuff that you're thinking about. I wish I hadn't worked late. I didn't need to go on that trip. It's not going to be, I had to go to work on the day that my son had chicken pox, because for a man, I don't think there's much conflict there. You have to go to work. But actually, why would a man feel differently about that from a woman? Answer, because society isn't telling the man to feel bad about it or to feel differently from a woman. Society accommodates the fact that the man will go off to work and the woman won't. And that is why probably it's best to see it as a work in progress rather than a question of right or wrong. Thank you, Danielle. Sophia is in Whitstable. Sophia, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I have two children. They're 16 and 20 now, but for the last 10 years, I've done this, single-handedly with my own business, so as a single parent.
Wow.
I have a bit of a kind of push-pull on this one, because on the one hand, I find it almost impossible to feel a success in either motherhood or as a businesswoman. But my situation actually 10 years ago forced me to grow my business so that I had a team and I could delegate. And I don't know whether I would have been able to do that if I hadn't been forced into that situation.
Gosh. Why don't you feel a success? Tell me more about that.
Because you can never, ever do one or the other at its full potential. I will never feel that I've done motherhood to the best of my ability or business to the best of my ability. I will never reach my full potential.
But if you were only doing one, do you think you'd feel perfect?
No.
So, do you see what I mean? So
I do.
If you had no children, you would not be sitting here thinking. I don't suppose you ever play video games, do you? So far,
no.
So on video games, there is something called achievement unlocked. And it's when you reach the point, and that's it now, it's done. It's you beat the boss level. I don't think you'd ever feel like, certainly no parent ever feels like that. And if they do, they're kidding themselves. I have now completed my duties as a parent to a position close to perfection. So it's, again, I can't say chicken and egg. I've said it too often today. But it's almost like we'd find something to feel bad about. But you're not a Catholic, are you?
No, and I think that's inherent in a female. I really do. And
Yes.
the one thing I will say is I haven't read this article, but the thing about the superwoman perception and
Yes.
whether we've been missold, I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing for next generations, but I do feel, although my children don't often tell me, that I am superwoman in their eyes, because I do juggle and fulfill all of their requirements, and I know that I do that, and I know I do it with lots of fun, and I don't think that I have passed on that
Well, I was
mantle
wondering.
to my daughter.
I was about to say to you that it sounds to me. I mean, you might beat yourself up for not being perfect, but it sounds to me as if you've come about as close to pulling it off as possible.
Almost, but I'm not. I don't feel financially secure ever, because there's just always something else to kind of pay for them. And when you do that by yourself, it's really hard work.
Yeah, no, of course it is. Of course.
If a bloke was, forgive me for saying this, but if a bloke was running his business at the age of 51,
Yes.
he would have an exit strategy by now, and I'm struggling to find that exit strategy right now. It's
Why is that? I mean, because of the 16-year-old still needing you, or
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, and also the 20-year-old. 20-year-olds at university still need an element of support, especially being that kind of COVID kid. Age.
What Tracy's just
We're getting
said.
onto something else.
No, we're not.
altogether
I'm coming
now.
back to that in a minute, but Tracy just distracted me while you were talking. She said, of course she doesn't play computer games, James. Only men have time to come home, sit on the sofa and get the console out. That's so unfair. That's sexism, that is, Tracy. I'm not having it. But I don't. The only bit I don't get is why you think a man in your position... I mean, you're saying you haven't had time to do the exit strategy?
Exactly.
Oh,
exactly.
okay.
I don't have, and I'm so busy spinning plates that I haven't yet had time to, where I've got to this point in my business and my life, I haven't thought about properly. I've thought about it, I've considered it, but I haven't put into action or planned for the next 5 years, which really is the point of my exit strategy, isn't it?
Yes, well, I presume so. I mean, and that is it, isn't it? That is bandwidth, to use that phrase that has come into our vocabulary relatively recently, and probably should have appeared in this conversation a little sooner, because it's all about bandwidth. The man has more bandwidth for what you describe. Because your bandwidth is going to be taken up by doing the domestic stuff as well. And that's in the absence of a man. Even if there was a man in your life, you'd have less bandwidth for the thinking about the business stuff than, or a partner, forgive me, than otherwise. So now I worry about blokey, being too blokey, seeing this through a male lens, albeit that I'm the only male in my house. And therefore a lot more informed than I would have been otherwise, and a lot more open than I would have been otherwise, because I'm seeing it more as societal and social and things that are improvable and changeable, which means that the conclusion that it can't be done is a little bit depressing. That conclusion that it can't be done because of entrenched positions would suggest to me we need to unentrench the positions. But of course that's easier said than done, and it is, as a man, literally easy for me to say. It is 12:48. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the question of having it all never gets asked about men. And that is where I guess the thing I tried to articulate a moment ago comes from. You read articles about how women are recognising that they can't have it all, that Superwoman is dead, professionals advise against aiming for the perfect work-life balance. Then we're going backwards, because we're saying you can't be like men have been for the last 50 years. At least that's one way of looking at it. I found that fascinating. We may have time for another call or two, but I'm not sure, because I want to get into this story properly. It's an almost unbelievable story. I think it's the kind of thing. Well, I don't know that you need any commentary from me on this, because Chris Chambers is LBC's correspondent in the Northwest, and he's been doing some extraordinary work in the aftermath of the discovery of a mass grave full of stillborn babies in Oldham. And parents now trying to find out where their babies are. And even as I say those words out loud, Chris, I can't quite believe what I'm hearing or what I'm saying. Can you take us back to the beginning of this story and then bring us up to the present day?
Afternoon, James. Yes, last month we reported on the discovery of a mass grave which had been found in a cemetery in Oldham, and inside that mass grave there were hundreds of stillborn babies. We've since found it was common practice up until the late 1980s or around then for the parents of stillborns to be told their babies were going to be buried in a family grave alongside a nice person who died the same day, but it has emerged that was a lie that was being told on a grand scale. Mums have told us that having had their stillborn babies taken from them in the hospital, usually without ever getting to see or hold them, they were then boxed up and given to the dad. He would take them to a cemetery where they were told they'd essentially be put into somebody else's grave. We've heard this was the case not just in Oldham, but in many different parts of the UK. Gina Jacobs found her baby in a similar grave on the Wirral 53 years after he died.
All those years I was under the impression that he had been placed at the foot of a coffin of a person buried that day. On the day when I came to find my baby, who I've now called Robert, as at the time they were not deemed worthy of a name, we weren't allowed to see, hold, name, whatever. We were just told that they would be taken and put that day in the grave with someone else. I couldn't believe it when the lady came out and she said, "Oh, he's over there." She handed me a map and said, "He's in with 62 other babies." So my first reaction was, no disrespect, but that has to be wrong. Would you please check? Because we were told he's in with somebody buried that day. And she said, "Oh, they told everybody that."
The grave where Gina's baby is buried had no identifiable features. It was just a patch of grass, and there were more than a dozen other mass graves alongside them with hundreds of babies inside as well. One of those is Diana's son. She's walked past the place where he's buried numerous times without any knowledge that he's there.
That's the awful part. That really is the awful part. Thinking I have walked past you, my son, for years. I really have. Not knowing, not acknowledging that this little bundle is in that ground. You hear all these stories about boxes tied up with string, and yes, that's factual. And I just wonder how much dignity was put into putting them in. Or somebody would say a little prayer or something, you know. There's no way of knowing all these things now because there's too much time has passed.
Since the discovery of the grave in Oldham last month, there's been efforts by local councillors and families to try and find the records of who the babies are, who the families might be, and to find a way for families to access them. The burial records are either non-existent or hard to find, and in most cases just on a piece of paper. Maggie Hurley is a local councillor in Oldham and has been working closely with the families.
This has been something that happened over probably 5 decades. Started in the 50s, the last baby was put into this grave here in 1987. 1987. We were still doing that and thinking it was okay. Everybody in the UK knows that this happened and are looking for their babies. Lots of people are looking for their baby. So every authority needs to be able to help and support these mothers and relatives to find them. The cover-up stops now. You need to give these babies back. They were never yours to keep.
These parents have been left with more questions than answers. Why were their babies tantamount to landfill? Who decided that's how they should be dealt with? Why were the families lied to? And how were the graves managed? We know in Gina's case, the grave wasn't closed until 18 months after the first baby had gone in. For all the other parents who had stillborn babies during this period, can their final resting place ever be found?
Chris, thank you for that. I hope it's not an irresponsible question or an unhelpful one, but with whom are these families angry? Responsibility against the backdrop of what one of the mothers said about the attitude that was taken to stillbirths at the time. Who might be held accountable, if anyone?
I think that the issue is that they were lied to, and they want to know why they were lied to. So that goes down governments down decades now, and this is what they want answers to. There must be a document somewhere where somebody has made this decision, and that's been passed around to whatever service it is that's dishing out this, thing that they have to go along with this lie, essentially, to basically tell people they're buried in graves with somebody else when they knew that wasn't true. So they want answers as to why that lie was passed around so much, and the opportunity that they've missed out on to go and lay a Christmas card or a birthday card or flowers and things like that at these graves. That's something that is deeply personal, which they've missed out on. And of course, whatever other information they don't know about, because it's only until fairly recently that they've actually found this was even a thing, and shocking as it is, they need answers. And for all those people now who might be thinking, well, what about my baby? They want to know, is their baby in one of these mass graves? And if they are, whereabouts is it?
Yeah, but you've actually answered my final question there, Chris, before I asked it, because a lot of people are already getting in touch with me wondering whether this scandal would extend way beyond Oldham, and I think clearly you'd hope not, but you'd have to be fairly optimistic to think that it would be confined to that town. Thank you, Chris Chambers there, LBC's correspondent in the Northwest, with a harrowing story that I suspect, as we've just alluded to, is likely to grow in the coming months and years. 12:55 is the time. Back to a story very much about the recent social contract, if you will. Women should stop striving for work-life balance to avoid living in a constant state of guilt, which I would agree with. And yet, as this hour of conversation has gone on, I found myself thinking that once again, you're letting men off the hook. Because if it hasn't worked out for women, that this notion that you can have it all, it's probably because you're not getting enough support in that pursuit, whether it's support from man, society, employers, whatever it may be. So we're almost making them feel guilty for feeling guilty now. Or are we? I don't know. Andrula is in Enfield. Andrula, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Enjoying your book, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
So essentially, I was forced to give up trying to have it all last year, about a year and a half after having my second child. So I spent, I have an 8-year gap with my children, and the first 8 years of my daughter's life, I strove to have it all. And I was somebody who really kind of believed in this notion. I worked at a very senior level in luxury fashion. I travelled a lot. I hosted a lot of events. And I quite enjoyed the status it gave me, although I spent the whole time at home full of anxiety at not being at work, and the whole time at work riddled with guilt about not being at home. And that was exactly where I lived. And I couldn't get any respite from this feeling. And I pushed through, and I told myself I was setting a great example for my daughter, and that I had a very, very supportive husband at home who actually did a ton of the domestic stuff. But there was always this kind of niggling feeling. I could never really get any respite from one of these two feelings, guilt or anxiety.
Yeah.
And then I had my son, and the idea of putting myself through it again, and I tried, but the pressure of work, and also post-COVID, a lot of industries were just so much more aggressive.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah, fair enough.
Especially industries that needed to generate quick cash flow. And so the pressure of it last year just all came to a head and made me very unwell. And I had to take a decision, and it was a very conscious decision that my husband and I both took together, that we would have to sacrifice lifestyle and things in order to finally get some balance.
And, so why do you think that what you felt, and it sounds like you've got a really healthy relationship with your children's dad, your husband, but why does he never feel any of the things you felt when he was trying to do both?
Because historically we've never had to put it on men that they've had to do both. They had to do one thing really well, which was be the breadwinner.
Yeah.
Now, when we talk about women having it all, we're supposed to look amazing while we're doing it. We're supposed to cook organic meals at home for our children. We're supposed to have the Instagrammable house,
yes,
right? But we're supposed to be these incredible, female bosses.
So
and leaders.
Nobody would go to the Instagram account of a FTSE 100 male chief executive looking for recipes.
Precisely.
Expecting him to have produced. So I'm glad you found a healthier way forward, but how does it reach your ears? And I can ask you this because your husband has done well, I think, in the great scheme of things. But how does it reach your ears when I say that the large part of the problem here is still men?
I don't know that it is.
No, I don't know.
I worked with a lot of women in the industry.
You've ruined my certainty.
Yeah, I worked with a lot of women in the industry, and I can say we were as bad to each other about it as the men were to us.
But that's still women trying hard to be like the men, isn't it? In terms of, we always said that in newspapers, is that the women had to have bigger testicles than most of the men did to get ahead in this business. I hope that's not true anymore. And Julia, thank you, and good luck moving forward. It's coming up to 1 o'clock. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back. Did you know, on Catch Up on Global Player, it's like you can pause but also rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4. But now on LBC, it's time for Sheila Fogarty.